Good afternoon, committee. This is the third meeting of the Civic Works Committee. The City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing or advisory committee meetings, and information upon request. To make requests for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. To make a request specific to this meeting, please contact cwc@london.ca. We are still holding our meetings virtually as London City Hall is open on a limited capacity to residents. We do have quorum. Councillor Cassidy will join us later as her timing permits. I'm looking now to the committee for disclosures of pecuniary interest. I will recognize Mayor Holder, followed by Councillor Turner.
Thanks very much, Chair. On 5.1 deferred matters, item 4 is the issue of 745 and 7 Waterloo Street. As my family own a cupcake and chocolate shop at that location, I will declare pecuniary interest.
Thank you. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With respect to 2.11, the 2020 external audit of London's drinking water quality management system and management review, I'll declare a conflict as I'm an employee of the Middlesex London Health Unit and supervise a team that has an enforcement and regulatory capacity with the drinking water systems in municipalities.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And I see no further conflicts of interest or pecuniary interest. Moving on to item number 2, the consent list. I have been asked to pull item 2.11, 2.8, 2.3. Looking for any other items that we would like pulled from the consent list. Okay, once again, it's 2.3 being the Warncliffe Road South improvements, 2.8 Dundas Place, and 2.11 being the drinking water quality management system. Okay, seeing nothing else to be pulled, the rest of the items will be put forward. Looking for a mover being Councillor Turner and a seconder being Councillor Helmer. Opening it up for discussions, questions, and comments on the remaining items. Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment on the extension for the Public Transit Infrastructure Fund agreement. I think that's a good news. I'm glad to see the federal government give a little bit more flexibility so we can make the best use of that money.
Looking for following questions. Just a committee item 2.10, the community employment benefits will also be pulled as there's a couple of application status, so we'll need to deal with that separately. Okay, looking for any further questions or comments or anything to staff regarding the remaining items. We will be voting in eScribe and that will be open momentarily.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
To item 2.3 being the Warncliffe Road South Improvements 100 Stanley Street update. There is also an added communication within our package in regards to that. Looking to staff for an update, and then we'll open it up for questions and comments.
Hello, Madam Chair. Am I free to proceed?
Yes, please do, Ms. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Certainly, we never like to be in a position where we come before committee to let them know that we've had a change in an estimate from the environmental assessment as we proceed into more detailed work related to a project. It actually happens quite rarely. It does occasionally happen, and although we believe we can manage this within our contingency, we felt it important that Council understand that there has been a change with respect to the relocation of 100 Stanley Street. In terms of context, however, I did want to make sure that committee and ultimately council are aware that heritage matters, including the built heritage environment, are actually a part of the protections under the environmental assessment that was completed and approved. So often there's a sense that this only applies to things like natural heritage, species at risk, and ecosystems. This particular aspect of the environmental assessment was a critical component of what was submitted to the previous council and what has been provided to the province for approval. So we wanted to make sure you understood where things were, that there has been a change in that particular price, and provide an update about what you would see from us with respect to relocation of the house. If there's a desire to pursue a different direction at this point, I would caution that does create challenges within the context of our environmental assessment process, as well as some of our heritage planning process, and we are pleased to answer questions in that regard.
Thank you for that update. Mayor Holder.
Thanks very much, and thank you, Ms. Chair, for your update. I think all of council and probably London was very surprised and shocked by the estimate rising as dramatically as it did. I mean, that's breathtaking, and not in a good way. Happens, and I'm pleased that it happens only rarely, and so I think that's a compliment to your staff that it is only rare, but this is one of those times. And there's been a huge public outcry about the rising costs on the project and the engineering concerns about the structural integrity of the house on the property. So to Ms. Chair, through you, Chair, what I'd like to ask, what steps would be necessary to demolish this house rather than proceed with a risky and costly move? And in light of her comments with regard to the environmental assessment, do we need an EA amendment? Or is this something that if it gets council support, we could accomplish via a simple direction of council? I'd be grateful for any comments or thoughts around that.
Thank you to Ms. Chair.
If I may, I'll start and then I'll turn it over to Mr. McRae. I also have Mr. Barrett here as well from planning if there's heritage concerns to reflect. We believe this would require an amendment to the environmental assessment process. We have not confirmed that at this point with the province, but given the significant interest in the heritage of this home through the EA, we believe that it would require an amendment process. At that point, should that be approved, and it wouldn't be guaranteed it would be, there would be a need to pursue the heritage demolition permit through our city regulated planning processes. I'm going to ask Mr. McRae if he can elaborate on the detailed steps, and perhaps Mr. Barrett might be able to provide a bit more information from the heritage perspective.
Thank you. Mr. McRae.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, Ms. Chair is correct based on our current knowledge available at the time. So we would likely start with reaching out to the Ministry of the Environment, who are the caretakers of the Environmental Assessment Act, and get their sense on what is required. But our hunch is that given the interest in this topic and the fact that it was the result, or it was the key component of two Part 2 order requests when the environmental assessment was filed, and there was specific direction back to the city on it and consultation requirements associated with the process. Given that previous interest and ministry involvement, we suspect that an addendum to the environmental assessment would be required, and that would entail likely a public review, public commenting process, likely associated with just this item, potentially the broader project, but we suspect just this item. But it also would be open then to Part 2 order requests, again, that mechanism available to the public, and those come with significant schedule implications. even if just the process that the provincial ministry requires tends to delay projects in the order of a year when regardless of the outcome. So that's sort of a high overview of the process required.
So, Mr. Mayor, we do have Mr. Baird as well to speak to the heritage aspect concern, and then we can certainly come back to you for a question, and then to Councillor Turner, as I do see his hand as well. Mr. Barrett, speaking to the heritage concerns.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, the process for heritage demolition, this is a designated property under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. So it would require an application for demolition. That application would be received by the city. It would result in a report to both Latch and a recommendation from Latch, and a report and a recommending report to the Planning Environment Committee. That meeting at Planning Environment Committee would be a public participation meeting. I guess I would also like to advise you that it would be difficult for staff to write a recommending report for demolition. As council is well aware and the committee is well aware, under reasons for supporting a demolition, the property being within the way of an infrastructure project or another construction project would not be a justification on a demolition request. But that would be the process that would have to be followed.
Thank you. Follow up to Mayor Holder.
Thanks very much. I think what is new, and I appreciate Mr. Barrett, Mr. McCray, Ms. Scher's information and insight. I think what is absolutely new is the staggering price increase associated with moving this building. And so if the headline was ... at any price ? Would we just say yes? And so if we would not say yes, at what point do we then say there has to be a point at which some common sense has to come back into the process? And I appreciate that when we undertook this project, and with with great compliments to our staff, we understood what we thought was a reasonable estimate to move things. And even as expensive as it was at that time, Chair, let me tell you, for it now to double and potentially more than double gets into the crazy stage. And I'm loath to support carrying on with this project. And I'd like to move motion just so we can focus the topic, but I'd like to, I'll hear from other colleagues, but I do have a motion with the clerk that I'd like to put forward. But I'm pretty delighted to hear from colleagues on this as well before I present that.
Thank you for that. And just as it was raised, could Mr. McCray confirm that the increased price is strictly just for moving the home, or does that also include getting it up to code in order for the city to potentially liquidate it later?
Thank you, Ms. Chair. Yeah, I can confirm that the cost presented in the report includes costs required to bring the house in its new location, so preparatory works in the new location, and also improvements to the structure to bring it up to current building codes and other current standards. So there's that, and there is a range in costs, and probably the most significant of those is temporary utility relocations required to accommodate the house move. We are quite hopeful that as we work through the process in more detail, that we're able to schedule those utility relocations that are required for the project in general, so that the house move can be done after they are completed, and therefore the additional costs reflected in some of that range are not incurred. So we're, there's some range, as we get it further into the process and a higher level of confidence and additional information from third parties, we're hopeful that we can work towards the lower end of the cost estimate.
Thank you. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I share the concerns. Everybody who read the report gave a bit of pause. Some of the questions that came out of that, thanks for framing it, Madam Chair. The cost estimates here are gross costs. They're not net costs, so they're not reflective of what the potential resale of the home after moving or relocation would be. And Mr. McCrae, you identified, and Ms. Scher, both identified that that any potential delays would have impact on this project too, if there was a subsequent bump up, or if the process of doing public consultations. Do we have any measurement on what that might do in terms of the cost itself? So let me frame it this way. If the house, we chose not to take the pathway of moving the house and went for just demolition instead, there's a series of things that we need to do. There's a minister's order that says that all the conditions that were identified in the EA have to be met. And if we vary from that, we've got to go back to the ministry and say, we're changing things. That's going to take some time to review. If there's some public participation involved, there's going to be some timing to review that, which might push us off by a season. Perhaps you could characterize what that is and if there's any costs associated with that delay. So if the net cost of moving this is greater than what the total costs of delay or change or anything like that might be as a result of moving towards demolition, are we able to quantify that and know on a pragmatic basis, is it more expensive for us to go down the path of not preserving the asset versus preserving it? Through you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you to staff. And if you require any clarification as we move through that question, Councillor Turner would be happy to do so.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. So the costs presented in the report are incremental costs, and they are, as a comparison to the other alternative that was considered at the time of the environmental assessment. And the comparison, it was just so that we are comparing apples to apples as it related to the previous information that was provided to council. Councillor Turner makes a good point in that to change course at this time does require additional process, potential delays to the overall project, and that would incur additional costs to that other alternative that we're not necessarily considering in this current report. But if we were to go back and revisit a change in course and back to that other EA alternative, there would be likely additional costs associated with the process and the potential delays to the project that would likely close the gap or reduce the cost differential that's presented in the report.
Councillor Turner, a follow-up?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. McCrae. I guess from that answer, it's going to be difficult to quantify that right now because there's a few speculatives. The construction delay schedule would potentially have impacts on the cost associated with that project, because those would have to be reframed and provided back to us. It could be close or it could be over. That's my concern, is that a market change in the project at this point could end up being costlier than what's being presented in the incremental cost in this report. One of the things that I find interesting, though, I mean, the alternative of moving the house across the street seemed to be predicated on providing the owner of that house an option of remaining in her house, rather than necessarily preserving a heritage asset. But everything got intertwined, heritage and trying to provide options for somebody who was reluctant to move from their house and provide some viable alternative becomes a lot more expensive for us, because now we're committed on a course of action that's been intertwined into the entire project and the EA, including our heritage assessment, impact assessments, and all of that. I really do have a lot of worry about creating a material delay and missing a construction season. This project itself is perhaps Mr. McCrae might be able to identify how the staging of this project interacts with a bunch of other road-related projects, and if we ended up delaying this, does it have kind of collateral impacts on other projects as well, in terms of other, let's say the subsurface infrastructure downtown, or the Victoria Bridge, or those kind of things.
Mr. McCray, if you could please speak to scheduling impacts with this project or others, recognizing this is a major corridor coming from the south end of the city into downtown.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. It's an important consideration and something staff has put their minds to as well. It is a north-south, major north-south corridor, and an important access to the core area. And that needs to be balanced off with the pending replacement of the Victoria Bridge, which is Rideout Street over the Thames River, and also the Wellington Gateway project with its improvements to Wellington. So the current programming of all those projects has considered and positioned the projects so that they can work with each other. Changing course on this project would create uncertainty, both with respect to this potential delays to this project, and then also uncertainty with how we juggle the scheduling and phasing of those other projects.
Thanks. I'll leave my comments here, other than just to say we're kind of boxed in. I'm with the mayor on this. The optics suck, to be candid. To have a marked increase in cost in the relocation. The impacts of changing course, however, seem far more consequential, potentially, than if we just maintain course in this circumstance. And I think we really need to be live to that before we consider any alternative action in this. And we just have to be really clear-eyed on what the incremental costs of a change in action will be, and what those incremental impacts will be on other very dependent and codependent projects and large-scale projects within the city, and how that might impact our mobility within the city in the next few years to come.
Thank you for that. I'll also draw committee's attention to your inboxes, as the clerk has circulated potential motion that may be brought up later in this conversation. So looking for the next speaker on the list who would have questions for staff in regards to item 2.3. Going to Councillor Van Meerbergen and then Councillor Helmer. Councillor Van Meerbergen, you're muted.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair. I think most of what I'm going to say is by way of commentary. I think on the most fundamental level, this is a waste of taxpayer dollars. There's no other way to slice it. We're talking about 1.1 million to move a house when the house doesn't need to be moved. The vast majority of my constituents have said, hey, this looks like hundreds of houses throughout London. Yes, it's an older home, but what are we supposed to do? Make all of these homes heritage sites? Would bankrupt ourselves? I mean, this is not a good course of action to go ahead here because an EA may have to be amended, and therefore we may be looking at other costs. The fact of the matter is, we can't allow ourselves to be trapped into this kind of scenario with extreme spending and not take some action to avert it. I would certainly second a motion that would help us go in that direction. Demolition is the way to go. My understanding was right from the beginning, it was more of a choice for this person who owned the home. Was she going to stay in the home, and therefore we could move it for her to maybe help her decide to stay in the home, or were we going to buy her out? My understanding was it was never supposed to be both. But here we are. We paid a fair market value for that house, and now we're going to spend, it looks like, could be 1.1 million to move it. And move it for what purpose? To sit there empty. who is going to buy it at full market value after it's gone through the rigors and the stresses and the strains of being picked up and moved, particularly an older home like this. And frankly, nobody right now knows what kind of costs we're going to run into. This is frankly a money pit, a potentially huge money pit, because the further we get into it, we're going to get more and more reports. Oh, by the way, this is going to cost more. That's going to cost more. We need to avoid this course of action, and frankly, stop it, and stop it as soon as possible. Because yes, this is an important road project, but for it to be hung up on a moving dilemma on a home with frankly more than questionable heritage value is bad public policy. So I look forward to seeing and looking at this motion that the mayor is bringing forward. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. Through the chair, question to staff. I know when we were working our way through the environmental assessment process several years ago, one of the options that was considered was retaining the building where it is and essentially protecting it during construction, and then having a remnant parcel afterwards with the building on it. It is the, as I'm sure colleagues will recall from going through the EA process, it's the construction of the temporary abutments that has the biggest impact on this property. So building the abutments to handle the railway bridge that's temporary as we work on the expansion of the more permanent structure, that is the part that is impacting this property the most. So the temporary abutments, that can't be avoided, but there was an option to retain the building to try and protect it during the construction period of 2 years. And one of the reasons it was not recommended, if I remember correctly, was that the cost was quite high. And there was a lot of risk involved in protecting the building. So given what we know about the cost of moving now, what about the option of leaving the building where it is, protecting the building, trying to build the abutments, and proceeding with the project without any delays?
Thank you. To staff.
Perhaps I'll start, and I'll also provide an opportunity to Garfield Dales to comment on the details of the project. Yeah, the impacts to the house are a result of the complicated construction of the new rail bridge abutments and the construction of them while live rail traffic continues on the bridge. And both the construction and the area required for the construction equipment overlapped with the house footprint. So very deep. This was a hot topic from the onset of the environmental assessment, and a detailed assessment of that was undertaken, and it was deemed just not feasible, and the risk of damage to the structure being so high that the more appropriate and risk compliant approach was to relocate the house. Really the only alternative identified at the time to avoid the house was a significant realignment of Warncliffe Road. And again, due to the requirements of maintaining live rail traffic throughout the project, that requires essentially a construction of the new bridge on the far side of the existing west abutment. So essentially a realignment of Warncliffe Road, something like 40 meters to the west, and that therefore had impacts to in the order of a dozen houses on the west side of Warncliffe Road. So I'll leave it at that. I'm not sure if Garfield Dales has additional information based on the detailed design that's been underway now for some time.
Thanks, Doug. So I would just add that the constructability considerations that you did mention, through the design process, those really have been confirmed as we've been able to progress the design. So really no new update in terms of a change in direction related to the the original EA recommendation, more confirmation that those impacts that Doug had mentioned around property and constructability are still strong considerations with the design. Thank you.
Okay, second area of questions. So if we were to amend the EA to do something different, what is the earliest we could start this project? If everything went smoothly, the EA amendment goes relatively quickly, there aren't any Part 2 bump up orders. What do we think is the earliest we can actually start the project?
To staff?
I'll start, and again, provide an opportunity to Mr. Dales, but I think an EA addendum could be done in parallel with the current design process, with some schedule delay, but fairly minimal. I think it would mostly happen in parallel, and so would still, assuming no bump ups, would still be able to enable a construction start for next year. However, the big risk, based on the Part 2 order requests submitted by the public when the previous EA was filed, is that there's a high likelihood that those might be received again. And as mentioned earlier, Part 2 order requests, just the timelines associated with ministry review and response tend to delay projects in the order of a year.
So in the optimistic scenario, the schedule stays the same, it can start next year. In the not so optimistic scenario where there's a Part 2 bump up order, the earliest it can start is 2023.
That's
Mr. McCrae, that was correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, we haven't worked through the details of this scenario, and that's something we could go away and do if directed by council. But that's the correct summary of my response.
Okay, last question, and I appreciate the patience from colleagues. Generally, what is the kind of price inflation that we see for construction projects like this over time? Because we're looking at least a year delay potentially. And I know the budget was set for this project a while ago. You put in contingencies to protect against these things over time, but on a $39 million project, it doesn't take much before 500,000 is increased from just delay. So I just wonder if you could speak to what we expect in terms of construction price index and what we might see in terms of just general price inflation on projects like this.
Okay, to staff, and then next up is Mayor Holder.
Yeah, the escalation in construction pricing is something that we monitor closely with respect to budgets. It's a function of fluctuating costs of commodities and building materials. What we tend to see is, unfortunately, that construction cost escalation exceeds inflation. And now it bounces around a bit, and so it's somewhat variable. A few years ago, it was very high, approaching double-digit percentages. That normalized, but so I don't have a good sense of what it will be. It's hard to predict what it'll be for the coming year, but I can say that it has trended fairly consistently in recent years as somewhat a little bit higher than inflation.
Okay, so I'm going to check my email for this motion, but in terms of commentary from my colleagues, I do think we have to be pretty hard-nosed about this from a financial perspective. This is an expensive project that we need to keep on budget. And unfortunately, for people who see no heritage value in the property, it seems to me like the cheapest thing to do is actually to move the building. It only takes 1 year delay at 3% before you've incurred another $1.1 million on a $39 million project. And based on the experience we had last time, I think a Part 2 order, which is simply as all you have to do is fill out some paperwork and send it to the province, and we'll be into a delay. So you end up with a more expensive project with no heritage building being retained, and it'll happen a year later. This is an important project that needs to proceed. It frankly should have been done a long time ago, this project. And a lot of councils have kicked it down the road, and we finally decided to go ahead with it. We gave it a budget, we get it going, and a delay comes with a lot of significant costs. Not just in terms of, the actual cost for the project, but the uncertainty that it develops for the businesses, many of whom are very opposed to this project, as Councillor Turner can tell you. We're talking about total closure of Warncliffe for months. People have tried to plan their lives and their businesses around what's going to happen. And, we went through a whole process to plan it out. It has been appealed. We have an approval in place. Eventually, we have to get on with it and build the project. And I can understand people being concerned about the cost escalation. Yes, these projects come with risks. That's why we put contingencies in them. And to say we're going to delay it and do less and it's going to cost more, that's not a good outcome. It's not a good outcome if you want to save money. It's not a good outcome if you want this project to go ahead. It's not a good outcome if you want to retain heritage buildings.
Okay, thank you.
Resources.
Thank you, Councillor Helmer. Mayor Holder, we'll go to you for your thoughts as you've listened to your colleagues' debate. If you are interested in your motion, just let us know and the clerks will put it on the screen as other colleagues are trying to follow around virtually with us as well. So the floor is yours.
I will ask the clerk to, through you, Chair, to put it on the screen, because I'd like to move a motion that Civic Administration take the necessary actions to submit an amendment to the environmental assessment process regarding Warncliffe Road South improvement, specifically Stanley Street. That's all in the motion, to permit the demolition of the residence of 100 Stanley Street and any other necessary admin steps to advance the project in as timely a manner as possible. And as I say that, Chair, I have to say, I think Councillor Turner and Councillor Helmer make some exceptional points. And this is not a comment against architectural heritage at all. This is an issue, a broader issue of cost, and it isn't a $500,000 decision.
Sorry, Your Worship, just 1 second. Councillor Van Mergen, are you still looking to second the mayor's motion? Yes, I see a hand wave. The clerk's acknowledged. Please proceed. It's been duly moved and seconded.
And I'm sorry, I apologize to Councillor Van Mergen as well. But it isn't a $500,000 decision that at 3% would cost what it does on a $39 million project, call it $1 million. But this is $1 million, $1.1 million to do a moving of a property. And that's not insignificant. We know that we were talking about the fact that this house could potentially be sold, or and presumably would be when it was ultimately moved. But, we've heard about, and I appreciate staff's comments about potential delays, about potential costs. But what is known is the real cost of having to move it now, or at least, again, best estimate, which is an escalating cost. That creates uncertainty as well. I'm the last person to want to spend more for this project than because there is a bigger picture here. And that's where I think Councillor Helmer's comments are very valid. At the same time, I've listened clearly to Mr. McCrae's comments, and we also have potential for minimum delays. I think what this motion, which has been duly seconded, does is it gives them the opportunity to do some additional work between now and council to get some sense of next steps. If that's not sufficient time, I respect that. But I think we have a bigger picture here to look at, and there are some known things that, frankly, I think our taxpayers. When we look at spending $1 million, we may not need to. And or if it gets absorbed in the next project, it balances out. But I also respect the impact it has on business. So it's one of these where you're on one side, you're torn because there are some parts of this that are very distasteful, particularly the cost has increased. On the other side, the cost of waiting or potentially waiting. And so I'm going to move forward with my motion. I appreciate that it's been seconded by Councillor Van Mergen, and we'll see where council would like to take this after committee's determined its own thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you for that. As this is the motion on the floor, looking for any speakers specifically to this motion, and I'll recognize Councillor Turner.
Thanks, Madam Chair. To be clear, I'm an advocate and supporter of heritage. This circumstance, when I read the report, I would have said, no, the cost has gone too high and this is going to be too challenging. But as we have had the debate and discussion here, it doesn't make sense. Like, it makes no sense to spend more money to push this down through a subsequent EA amendment than it would to move the house. We don't want to spend more cash and then impact 3 or 4 other massive projects as a result of this. And I can guarantee that the bump up will occur, because the challenge on the bump up was there were 2 items that led to the bump ups. And one of them was with the respect to the heritage attributes of this building. So if this is revisited, it will get bumped up again and it will get delayed again. Councillor Helmer is quite right. 3% on a $40 million project is $1.2 million. So $1.2 million in additional costs on top compared to what's been projected in the report here. And that's just a start. So I completely understand what the mayors would want to do. This is where my head was in the beginning when I read the report. It's not where I'm at now. I think we've had some pretty clear evidence that this is a rather perilous path and has fairly significant impacts that we can't foresee. And it's tied over just our feelings on what the cost would be associated with moving a building. And I'm the same place. I'm there. I understand. But pragmatically, it doesn't make sense to spend more money to take this course of action. So I urge my colleagues to defeat the motion.
Thank you. I'll look for anyone else on committee who would like to speak to this, and then I'll go to guests of the committee as Councillor Lewis has joined us and is also waiting. Okay, so no immediate hands up at committee. I will recognize Councillor Lewis. And Councillor Lewis, we can't hear you. Maybe your headset's off.
How's that?
Wonderful. Please proceed.
Perfect. That darn little mute button on the back of the earphone that gets bumped out all the time. I appreciate you recognizing me. I do, however, want to be respectful. I do think that Councillor Van Holst may have had his hand up in advance of mine. I don't know if you had him on your list or not. I'll just defer to you for a moment to check that.
Please proceed with Councillor Lewis. I'm patient.
Okay, I'm just, I'll have the clerk check who virtually has their hands up as I can't see them. Because I just can't see Councillor Van Holst on my screen. Okay, so if you two don't mind taking turns, I'll let Councillor Lewis proceed as his headset's working, and then I'm happy to recognize Councillor Van Holst after that.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the discussion here. I think we have a lot of feedback from the public on where they feel this issue needs to go. I've certainly heard from a number of my constituents and constituents from outside my ward as well. I appreciate the points that both Councillor Helmer and Councillor Turner raised. I also appreciate what we heard from Mr. McRae, that the design can continue in parallel with an EA amendment going forward. And I note in the report that it's approximately a year to move the building anyway. So when we talk about construction delays, I think there's an opportunity to coordinate with an EA amendment and the design moving along in parallel, so that the delays maybe are not as significant as they may seem at this moment. I appreciate the calculations that Councillor Helmer has done on the potential inflationary cost. I think that there's some good reason to feel that those are reasonably accurate, but they are also speculative to some degree. And I say that respectfully because, you know, inflation rates do change. Supply chains and those costs do change as well. So I'm not sure that we can balance the potential costs against the costs we know now. What I do know is that, and through you, if I can ask a question to staff, Madam Chair, how much of the contingency does this cost increase represent? Because I am concerned that along the way with the project as a whole, there might be other needs for the contingency that's there. And I, would hate to say, go ahead and spend this extra money and then have to have staff come back to us later on in the project and say, well, now we need even more because we spent the contingency to move the house. So I'm wondering if staff can give me a ballpark on how much of the contingency this represents.
Perfect. To staff, how much of contingency this represents and how much is left should this be approved?
The cost estimates for projects evolve as the confidence level improves with more detailed information. Early on at the time of the EA, that's typically around 15%. It's probably becoming lower now. That the overall project value is in the order of 40 million, but there's still significant unknowns, particularly with respect to the railway and their requirements particularly throughout the construction phasing. So I cannot provide a definitive value of the construction contingency at this time, but I just hope that helps put the value of this the house move item that we're talking about in terms of the context of the project, which is valued at $40 million.
Perfect. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. McRae. That is helpful. So I am a guest of the committee. Obviously, I'm not voting on this today, but I think when this does come to council, if the mayor's motion passes, I will support it. I think that this is the direction we need to go. We have sort of painted ourselves into a bit of a box here, as Councillor Turner indicated, but I don't think that when you put yourself in a box, you don't try and find ways to remove that box and look at other ways out of it. So I'll support this. I've heard very clearly from the public that this is the direction that they want to take on this. And I think that in terms of the overall costs and the planning, what I'm hearing from staff is it may not be much of a difference in cost either way. And in that case, it definitely leads me towards supporting the public direction on this.
Thank you for joining us today and having the discussion here versus at council. It's appreciated. Councillor Van Holst, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And my first question through you is to staff. What would the cost of the demolition be?
To Mr. McRae.
Thank you. Through the chair, as indicated previously, the cost estimates in the report are incremental costs. Cost of the demolition comes with some heritage process, heritage permitting, consultation, and also a commemoration process. So it is in the order of $100,000 to $200,000 likely for that scenario. That's a rough estimate at this time because it was not being pursued. We'd need to refine that process and cost estimate if we were to go down that path, but that provides an order of magnitude.
Perfect. A follow-up, Councillor Van Holst?
Yes, thank you very much. That's helpful. And one thing I would consider would be taking the difference between the demolition and the the moving of the house and putting those funds in a heritage reserve fund, which is something I think we've needed for a long time as another way of dealing with heritage, where we can just acquire properties like that. So I'd like to, I think that's something we could do that might make happy those people who are really concerned about heritage in this case, and help us avoid that potential bump up. I will support the mayor's motion as well, and I think it's worthwhile for us to see where that goes. Certainly we can try that, see that how that happens. My next question through you, Madam Chair, is the target site. What's the address where this property would be relocated?
Mr. McRae, just confirm the address of the location.
I'm going to ask if Garfield Dales has that information in his mind.
Unfortunately, I don't have the municipal address, but it essentially it's located at the corner of Warncliffe and Evergreen. So that would be the southwest side of that intersection.
Okay, thank you very much. Do you happen to know the size of that property?
At a preliminary level, we have looked at the ability to site the house at that property, and it certainly is feasible. That was some work that was done through the environmental assessment process to look at that at a preliminary level.
Okay, so I could find the size of that property somewhere?
Yes, and I can certainly follow up with those details.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Dales. Another follow-up question, Councillor Van Holst?
No, Madam Chair, I think, although I do want to make a comment, I don't think it's a question. I think it's unfortunate that we're in a position where our plan didn't include a way to deal with this particular possibility. As I remember speaking with Nan Finlinson prior to the previous decision, and was aware, and I'm sure I said as much, that she had no interest in moving into the house if it was moved. She wanted to stay in that particular location. So in that instance, it might have been possible for us to anticipate that we wouldn't need to move this property. So that's, however, unfortunately, our situation seems like we didn't have a plan to deal with that occurrence, and here we are. So those are my comments for now, and I do believe I'll support the mayor's motion, and I encourage the committee and you, Madam Chair, to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Sorry, the clerk is just helping me. Trying to help. I appreciate that. I'm going to go to Councillor Turner, and we're speaking still to the motion on the floor that has been moved and seconded.
Just really quickly, it's going to come off preachy, my apologies, but I think we need to be really cautious when we say that our constituents and people are writing us and saying that this can't stand. One of the things that we have as a job as councillors is to understand all the background material and a lot of the information that most of the public won't have, and explain those things to them. A course of action that costs more and takes longer is not the right course of action. So let's be cautious on that and say, yeah, okay, people are writing this. People have been writing me too. And I've told them, yeah, it doesn't make any sense to me. And I didn't support it until I got here in this meeting and I started to hear some more information. So we need to do a better job of communicating the rationale for our decisions and the information that we might have that might not be readily projected in the media. So anyway, and I think this is one of those key, really key questions of good governance and public administration.
Thank you for that. And Councillor Kayabega has joined us as well. I'll turn to her for her comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing me to speak at your committee. I just wanted to also echo what my colleague, Councilor Turner, is saying. This is a decision that was made years ago, and it is unfortunate that right now, as we move to move the heritage house, it's costing a lot more, but changing and demolishing a heritage building and just not considering the amount of work that went into this and the decisions and the impact that this has had not only on the owner of the home, but the community altogether, because this was a very high profile move and just changing it around to demolish it is not ideal. And I would hope that committee would understand the work that went into this and support this motion. I can't vote because I'm not part of the committee, but I will be voting and making more comments at council. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you for joining us and bringing those comments to committee. I did have one question as chair to staff, looking to see if any RFPs and tenders have been issued that would be impacted for their timelines based on the potential decision.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. I'll let Garfield Dales confirm, but I don't think there's contractual commitments that would be compromised by this direction.
Yeah, I can confirm that. And just if I could just briefly circle back, Councillor Van Hol's question, the municipal address is actually 51 and 53 Warncliffe Road.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. He is still in attendance and would have heard that. So thank you for your follow-up. A question, I guess, for committee's information, I'll pose it again here just as we're in public and they could hear the answer. It was to Mr. McCray, and I asked if there was a chance that the city could just offer the house up for sale where it is and have a potential buyer move the home to a location of their choosing at their cost. And he raised some concerns about that as well. If Mr. McCray could just say the concerns he had with that option as well, just for committee is aware.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. It's yeah, there would be concerns with that approach, given the commitments in the current environmental assessment as to the city's action with respect to the dwelling. So from a EA compliance perspective, it would compromise the city's ability to fulfill the requirement. And then also from a project management perspective, putting, it's a critical path to the overall project implementation. So putting the control of that process in the hands of a third party would present a significant risk to the project schedule on the whole. Thank you.
Thank you. Looking to see if there's any other speakers on. Okay, the last one I see is Mayor Holder.
Thanks very much. Chair, I don't think there's been an issue in the 2+ years that I've been on council where everyone is right. Every council colleague that has expressed a view today and has expressed concerns, I think have provided very legitimate concerns about the issue on both sides of it as well. And I think that has been, I think it's really helpful for us all as we review next steps. I'm absolutely of the strong view that public opinion matters, and it's been very overwhelming in its in the expression of disappointment around the price escalation, so dramatic, and to the point where, as we've heard Mr. McCray say, demolition would be $100,000 to $200,000. Extending this project or doing this project the way it was suggested with the house transfer is upwards of $1.1 million. So effectively, effectively almost $1 million decision right there. And I think that takes out some of the aspects of the concern about the potential, and I want to put it that way, of this project taking longer. And I'm the last person that wants this project to take any longer than it needs to. And I'm hopeful, and when you're in politics, I guess we're all a little optimistic that it doesn't take longer than it needs to. But it's not the price factor in terms of those. I want to be clear. I think those two almost negate each other. But I think that the impact, the real cost in terms of business delay, I get it, and uncertainty, I get that as well. So I know it's tough, but I think it's at some point we make a statement and that is in favor of our taxpayers, and at the same time, is it possible that this could slide a different way? I mean, it is. So, but that's why, to quote or to recollect Councillor Turner's comments here, it's why we make these decisions. But absolutely, people, all of us, I think, are quite distressed, staff included, I'm sure. I know, in terms of the dramatic price increase. So that's my final comments, and I'll look forward to the vote, Chair.
Thank you for those wrap-up comments. Seeing no further hands raised. The vote will be open on e-scribed in regards to the motion that's put forward by Mayor Holder and seconded by Councillor Van Merbergen.
Chair, has it come up on the screen yet?
It has here in chambers, looking to colleagues if they could, at those remoting in, if they could see it on their e-scribe as well.
Chair, I cannot vote yet.
Okay, would you like to vote verbally?
Yes, please, and I'll vote yes.
Okay.
To 3.
Okay, looking to committee members to put another motion on the floor or the original staff recommendation. Councillor Turner?
I'll vote to receive the staff report.
Okay, so you'll put the original staff motion to receive on the floor. Would I have a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor Helmer. Looking for any discussion or questions on this. Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. I expect to have a very similar discussion at council. And I think it would be helpful if between now and council, we could just have a bit of a timeline that outlines if an amendment were to proceed, what are sort of critical points along that timeline and where could delays or not be introduced. I think people need to understand that given where we're at in the project and where the critical risks might be. I do think there's a lot of consensus around keeping the cost of the project as low as possible and not delaying it. And I think we need to have a very good understanding of what the potential risks might be, both to the timeline and the overall costs.
Okay, thank you for that. The clerk has indicated that that doesn't need to be a part B in here. If Ms. Scher is comfortable providing some sort of written information to council in advance, that would be acceptable. So looking to Ms. Scher for comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We will do our best to quantify the risks and costs as we know them through the path of either pursuing a change to the environmental assessment or based on the plan ahead of you right now. So we will do our best to provide that in advance to council.
Thank you. Looking to committee for any other questions or comments in advance of the vote. Okay, seeing none, we will open the vote.
This is to receive.
That's correct.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-1.
Thank you for that committee. We're moving on to item 2.8, being the Dundas Place temporary bicycle lanes and revised parking limits. I'll ask the staff to introduce this one to committee, and then we'll start our speakers list. Mr. McCray, I believe this one's yours as well.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. Yeah, the report before committee proposes two items for council consideration. The first is introducing temporary cycling lanes on Dundas Place as part of a pilot program aiming to provide safe connections for all road users while supporting downtown businesses through the upcoming construction in the core. So the basic description of that would be one lane of general westbound traffic being prohibited. So it'd be the street would be converted to one-way eastbound for motor vehicles and bicycle lanes on either side. The report also that item is a recommendation for council to proceed and to return to committee with the necessary bylaw. the bylaw that is attached is another item, a business support item, in response to feedback that we've received from both businesses and parking customers related to the current parking rules on Dundas Place. And it essentially introduces free 1 hour parking on Dundas Place. And that would be timed with the other half of, with the cycling lane pilot project. So these are temporary, the bike lane is a temporary change. And again, associated with construction mitigation. It evolves out of consultation on our core construction projects and is responding to comments received, particularly with respect to cyclist comfort and safety on Dundas Place. So there's obviously interest in the cycling component of the pilot project. The proposed design provides cycling with a dedicated space with a buffer between the bike lane and parked cars to address the potential for dooring. That's in accordance with current design standards. It includes some barriers in the form of planters to achieve an aesthetic appeal, but barriers are proposed to be fairly limited, and the reason for that is it's to retain the ability of Dundas Place, the flex street, to be able to accommodate events like on-street retail, festivals, sports, concerts. You know, we're all hoping that we're eventually going to be able to host another Raptors Jurassic Park celebration, and the design of Dundas Place has been intentionally flexible and trying to reduce fixed elements in the streetscape so that it's easily adaptable for whatever sort of activations are desirable. So that informs the design, and the design retains the loading zones, accessible parking, and general parking spots to continue to support businesses throughout COVID. So some of the submissions to committee relate to the concerns with dooring. The schematic provided in the committee report does not detail out. It is a schematic, and it doesn't detail out the exact design of the pilot, but it does recognize that there's bike lanes proposed associated or adjacent to parking, and there is a buffer that's not shown in the schematic, but it exists out there today by virtue of the pavement, the tactile strip of unique paving units and the trench drain that ends up being approximately a 3-foot width between the bike lane and the adjacent parking. So that's sort of gets to that issue, and as it relates to a bi-directional facility that's proposed in some of those communications, that was one of the alternatives that were considered during the development of this pilot project, and it does have applicability within the Dundas Place, the 700 meters of Dundas Place, given that there's no accesses. It could potentially work. However, it wasn't recommended for the pilot, just in that it doesn't tie into the conventional unidirectional lanes on either side, like on either side of the road, that are being implemented outside of Dundas Place. So at west of Rideout Street and east of Wellington. It's also a more onerous layout with respect to traffic signals, and requires additional signal heads and phases at all the signalized intersections. So all four intersections within Dundas Place. So and I think some of the concerns relate to the use of Dundas Place, and that is something that all Londoners are getting used to. Given the unique nature of the flex street, we're all learning to use it, and with some illegal traffic movements, particularly parking and stopping, have been observed. And during COVID, there has been some discretion applied to enforcement, just with empathy towards business needs. But if the bicycle lanes were experiencing, we do anticipate some challenges regardless of what pilot approach we take. But revisiting the enforcement strategy would be part of that to get at that concern. So the pilot project there is for council's direction for staff to proceed, and part of that would be visiting the concept with the stakeholders, including the advisory committees. So with that, I'll wrap it up. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So that was, just to be clear, advisory committee consultation during this March cycle that we're entering into, Mr. McRae?
Yes, we would take the direction from Civic Works Committee and begin reaching out to advisory committees, knowing that this is time sensitive, and we wouldn't act until we receive firm council direction, but we would certainly start consultation based on the direction we hear today.
Okay, thank you for that. So just for committee and those watching, I will go to committee members first. There is a speakers list started, and then we have a couple of guests at committee who are waiting to speak. I'll recognize those individuals following committee. I'll also be sticking to a 5-minute time limit for your first opportunity to speak, and then we'll circle back around just to make sure that everyone has a chance to stay engaged with the conversation as we move through it. So to begin, I will go to Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. McRae. So yeah, this has certainly generated a lot of interest, and it's going to take a little bit of work to get it to land at the right place. Conceptually, the idea of creating a safer environment and a connection for cycling is key, as well as access to businesses and supporting recovery in the core. So I get those interests. The question is, how do we marry all of those to find a landing spot that addresses them? I'm glad to hear that the Cycling Advisory Committee and the Transportation Advisory Committee will be consulted. That was one of my concerns. I didn't see that in the consultation list, and it's not on CAC's minutes that we approved earlier today. So it would be important to this. First question, if I might, through you, Madam Chair, is what is the timing necessary to land on a decision, and how much latitude is there for adjustments to the schematic that's been presented?
To Mr. McRae.
Thank you. Through the chair, yeah, we would reach out to the advisory committees this month and work through the design with them. There is room to change the to tweak the design. I think a change in the broad concept would come with delays, and particularly with respect to a bi-directional facility, the implementation of that due to the signal modifications required, and that is intrinsically linked to a construction project, a tender that's been awarded with the improved connection at the west end, and the signal changes that are part of that project wouldn't be able to facilitate the connection required for a bi-directional facility without delay on that end of the project. But I guess back to the consultation, yeah, this is being presented as a pilot project, and it's a construction mitigation that's come out of the consultation we've heard. We wanted to approach it cautiously and get council's direction to proceed with it, and certainly once we get an indication of that direction, the intent is to work it through with the advisory committees and others of interest.
Thanks. So I think I'm generally not a big supportive fan of one-way streets, but where we're going to see fairly significant impacts to King Street, we're going to start to see a shift in that one-directional flow off of King Street onto other lanes, which means that Dundas is probably going to get a little heavier. The concept is proposed here. One of the key questions that was raised from cycling advocates, for one, is that separation between traffic and cycling lanes. Was there any consideration to bi-directional cycling lanes so that you have the cycling lanes together on one side and the traffic on the other, and then you can separate and actually put the planters right down the center to create some clear delineation between the two, rather than this. I know that one of the traffic control measures we have is the restricted speed limits at 30 kilometers an hour through here, but it does resonate with me a little bit, especially if we're going to be shifting King Street traffic onto here, that there is some protection incurred. That's the question. I think the other is what alternatives were considered in arriving at this proposal.
Okay, thank you to staff. And if you actually want to clarify what traffic we were converting to York versus Dundas as well.
Yeah, thanks. That's a good point. So with the closure of King Street, the detour posted for drivers will be to route that traffic down to York Street. But Councillor Turner makes a good point that I think we will inevitably see some increased traffic volume on Dundas, and that is at the root of why we're implementing this pilot. And I apologize if I use the lingo too freely in my head, but when I was referring to a bidirectional facility as one of the alternatives that was considered, yes, I was referring to bicycle lanes, and both of them being on the north side of the road. So that was an alternative that was considered. There was probably essentially three alternatives that were considered. The first is advisory bike lanes, which is a quasi bike lane with dashed lines, and so that's in a conventional arrangement, so similar to what we're proposing. But it would maintain two-way traffic for motor vehicles, and vehicles would verge into the bike lane as necessary to get around each other. And that has been, we've heard some promotion of that concept for this specific project from the Association of Pedestrian and Bicycle Professionals, from that group. But we felt that the cycling committee or the cycling community wouldn't be comfortable with that approach. It has been used in some other cities like Ottawa and I believe Montreal, but it wasn't. It was not promoted due to a sense that it would not be looked upon favorably by the cyclists. And then, yes, the other alternative is this bidirectional concept where you have both bike lanes on the north half of the street. So at either end of Dundas Place, there would need to be modifications to the traffic signals. So essentially the traffic signals would be red in all directions, and then there will be a dedicated cycling phase, because the bike lane and the motor vehicle lane in the one direction have to switch sides. I believe the eastbound lane, they have to switch. So so it's it's a detail, and it's not normal. We don't have any of those locations in the city, so it would take some getting used to. There are some examples around there's examples around North America of these bidirectional facilities, but they do take some getting used to, and they're more permanent facilities and require certainly a big period of education and getting used to. And so due to the complications of the transitions, also requirements for signal modifications at all the intervening intersections as well. So at Talbot and Clarence, to again enable turns both for cyclists and for vehicles to turn across each other's paths, just given the sort of the unconventional nature of the arrangement, and the additional time to implement. That was why that alternative was placed aside, and the alternative that's shown in the schematic in the report was recommended. And again, it's a pilot project. We aim, a key component, which I don't think I've mentioned, is monitoring, getting feedback from businesses, users, to get feedback, and it's exploring how we can flex our flex street, and it doesn't really preclude different arrangements in the future.
Good. Thank you for that. Just one moment, Councillor Cassidy, we are on item 2.8, and following this 2.10 and 2.11 have also been pulled, and the rest of the consent have been dealt with. Councillor Turner, a follow-up question to staff at this moment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, so that's helpful. I'm be intrigued to see what comes back on the 30th to the committee. I really would strongly support having a bidirectional facility and unidirectional flow for traffic with separation. The next question is just around the purpose of the free parking. Anecdotally, and perhaps you might have some empirical knowledge of this. The parking spots on Dundas Street are rarely, if ever, available. They've got a very, very high utilization. If I drive down Dundas and I look for a spot there, I have a bit of joy when I find one because it's that rare. So do we really need to incentivize the parking along that stretch to move to an hour of free parking? Because I'd imagine its utilization is upwards of 90%, but perhaps you might have some better information than I do, Mr. McCrae, through you, Madam Chair.
To Mr. McCrae?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'll start and I'll let Stephen Miller chime in after I'm done, but it's not so much, yeah, we get a Dundas Place is a popular destination and we want it to stay that way. And during the design of the street, we tried to minimize the amount of fixed elements in the streetscape, again, to enable activations and whatever they may be. There was a recognition that no matter how well we thought we had the design worked out, that if we put a big parking meter on the street that's immovable, that no doubt it will eventually be in the way of a patio or maybe a sight line for a concert or some sort of venue like that. So the decision was made not to put parking meters on Dundas Place, and that the honk app would be the method of payment. I think the feedback has been received that the honk app isn't readily accessible to everyone. So that the arrangement to date has been, in recognition of that equity issue, that it's been 1 hour free and then 1 hour paid, and customers could go to adjacent streets if needed to obtain parking passes if they didn't have access to the honk app. Anyway, I think it's been complicated and maybe confusing to customers, but it originates with keeping the flex street flexible. But I'll pass it over to Stephen Miller to elaborate on how it's intended to better suit the customers and the businesses and really kind of simplify how Dundas Place works from a parking perspective.
Thank you. Through the chair, enforcement on Dundas Place has been traditionally difficult. The regulations being 1 hour for free and the second hour paid through Honk Mobile. Officers have to go to the area, time vehicles that are parked in that location, then come back an hour later. If the vehicle is still parked in that location, then they have to check and see if it's paid through Honk Mobile. This enables the vehicles to be parked there for 2 hours, and the proposed changes would just be timing the vehicles for a 1 hour parking limit.
Councillor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm not seeing this strong argument because utilization is high. If it's ultimately at its root, it sounds like it's an incentive to get people into the core and using the core and being there. I hear a couple of logistic questions, but it sounds like those logistic questions might actually be exacerbated by this change to replace 2 hour paid parking with 1 hour free parking. That creates those. Sounds like it creates those same enforcement challenges. But last question before I move on, I'm I'm supportive of A, but I'll ask later that we separate out B, because if the intent is to get people down there and they're already down there and they're using the spots, then why would we dispense with the revenue associated with that? That doesn't make any sense to me either. But if we're looking at a core parking strategy, then that's a different question.
20 seconds.
Yep. What accommodations are made in this in terms of loading zones? Because that's one of the other challenges. So is there the ability for businesses to be able to get access to their products both in and out?
Okay, question to staff regarding loading zones, please.
Yeah, thank you. Just to clarify the parking, it currently is 1 hour free initially, and that is an accommodation, a recognition that not everybody has access to the honk app. So essentially retains that 1 hour free accommodation and makes it easier to enforce, as Mr. Miller pointed out. One of the advantages of the bike lane pilot as currently proposed is that it does retain the loading zones, accessible parking spots and parking that currently exist. And we know we've heard from the business community that is important, and that was a consideration in the development of that. I think we've also heard some initial feedback from cyclists that there's different ways that we can maybe configure the proposed pilot with respect to the parking. Maybe it goes around the parking, and those are the kind of details that we plan to work through with the Cycling Advisory Committee and others, and that there is some flexibility and uniqueness, particularly with respect to the north side loading zones and accessible parking.
Thank you. I have seen no other hands up at the moment from committee. So I will go to the mayor, and then it will be Councillor Kayabega and Councillor Lewis.
Thanks very much, Chair. A couple of questions, if I can. Thank you, Mr. McCrae, for your information. That was very detailed, and I appreciate it. I also appreciate, by the way, that at the end you made a reference to the business community in terms of its perspective, and you added some piece to that. And I think coupled with that was Councillor Turner's comment about deliveries for business, which frankly, as a result of the bike lane on King Street, really limited the ability of businesses to accept deliveries. So the sensitivity towards that, I think, is particularly important. So my question to you is this, if I can, please. In my discussion with downtown London, the administration there, they're in the process of surveying, and I think as recently as last night completed the responses of their, getting the responses from their various members with regard to Dundas Place and the options. What I'm concerned about is what we're putting in here today, what we're asked to be voted on today, and then ultimately by council. What happens if, for example, our downtown business community, which I think which we all know is a critical piece to this, says, I don't think so, but in the absence of that feedback, I'm concerned of us casting a die that goes down so far that there's no retrieving it. If in fact the business community objects quite dramatically to it. I just wonder if you could share your thoughts on how we respond to the community.
Yeah, to staff.
If I may start, and I may turn it over to Mr. McCrae afterwards, Madam Chair. Certainly, we've had some preliminary discussions with the BIA, and we intend for those discussions to continue through the next month. We are not asking council to approve the bylaw at this point. We're asking for you to give us direction to do that consultation and prepare that bylaw. So that would be back in front of you probably towards the end of March, depending on how the consultation goes, certainly into April at the absolute latest. You will have another opportunity to hear from those businesses as well as the cycling community. What was top of mind for us, and I think that's been a compromise that some of the members of the cycling community have concerns about, is that in the COVID environment, those loading zones, parking zones, stopping locations are extremely critical. more so than ever. So it was important to us to provide an alternative to you that didn't impact that on-street parking or loading, and that didn't impact patios and didn't impact our ability to hold events that supported the merchants and the general downtown along that road. So you certainly get another opportunity to look at this, but we do have been trying to balance that perspective of both providing construction accommodation as well as supporting businesses through COVID and recovery.
So Chair, through you to Ms. Sharon, thank you for that. And I know we've listened a lot to the cycling committee, and I'm concerned about getting clear feedback from the BIA. I think that's absolutely essential to have that. So there may have been whatever consultation, but as recently as this morning, when I spoke to the Downtown London BIA, they had only just, as of yesterday, completed the feedback from them. And when I look at A, which is really clear, it's to create a temporary bicycle lane pilot project. That's it. It isn't to say that we are going to get that feedback from the business community, the cycling community, other Londoners, and then come back with a recommendation to staff. It's very clear about creating this temporary bicycle pilot project. So how much we can amend that through you to our city engineer. I appreciate there's a lot of sensitivity to the cycling community. I'm trying to get the same sensitivity to the business community, which I know our staff, and I know you do that. You do it really well. And so I'm just trying to see where they fit into this, to all of this as well, please.
Okay, to staff.
Madam Chair, through you, Madam Chair, certainly the design that we put forward at this point in the direction we're seeking is an intent to balance what we think is the need to provide a safe construction link for cyclists on a one-year pilot project basis for this year, and to continue to support the use of that street as a flex space, as well as to provide that loading and parking and patio space for adjacent merchants. Our cover report that comes back at the end of the month or early next month would include a summary and synopsis of any of the feedback that we've heard. So you will make the ultimate decision on a bylaw with that content available to you.
And would that mean then, through you, Chair, two things: that number one, if a decision is made other than the cycling approach, and I don't know if it is or isn't, to be fair, I don't know, is it possible to make amendments at that time? And I'll ask that of our city engineer, if that is the determination in 30 days from now, or have we gone too far? And I guess I'm worried about the last example we just dealt with. We had a lot of controversy about something that some had felt we'd, and probably have in some respects, gone too far. Have we taken this too far to the point that we can't reel in something that may not make practical sense? I'm not even presuming what that would be.
Through you, Madam Chair, certainly at this point, no. What we would bring back would provide committee and ultimately council the ability to accept the recommendation and bylaws proposed by staff, to make amendments on the floor at committee should you so choose, or to send that back to staff or choose to take no action. Council always has all of those prerogatives. We are not committed to pursue any of them at this point. What we would be looking for that endorsement to do is to take those next steps with respect to consultation and adjustment of the schematic into a more detailed design.
So, Chair, through you, what I did, yeah, I think I think A is more prescriptive than I imagined it to be, and the only other part that I saw in the wording of A, it said temporary bicycle lane, and it's got the deadly words pilot project, and I say that for any pilot project, which means, are we intending this to be an ongoing, or is this just simply a temporary bicycle lane on Dundas Place? Through you, Chair, to Ms. Chair, what does pilot project for this purpose mean, please?
Through you, Madam Chair, we have not actually done a temporary accommodation for cycling to this extent or degree to reflect the need to accommodate that mode from construction on adjacent streets. We have in some cases provided a very small bike lane adjacent to traffic lanes, or indicated where bikes may detour to. So this is truly a pilot project for us to see what the uptake and effectiveness of a reasonable investment to support this mode, much as we do when we build temporary roadways to accommodate traffic modes, and how it works. So it will be part of a monitoring process. We would report back to council. This is truly in response to the need to provide an east-west safe connection.
So for this purpose, then, what you're saying through your chair to Ms. Chair is that that we're not reading anything more than this is a project. The fact that it may or may not continue depending on. So I'm just trying to get a sense of that, because I'm inclined to suggest that, and I'm thinking about this as well, whether we simply receive and take no action, which is one option, or whether we or whether we go down this road that we assess in 30 days. And again, if A wasn't so prescriptive, I'd be a bit more comfortable, but we'll see what other colleagues say. But thank you, Ms. Chair. I appreciate your candor on this.
Okay, thank you for that. With 30 seconds to spare, excellent job, Mayor. So if, as per Councillor Turner's request, if this motion does move forward, A and B can easily be separated. I will go to Councillor Kayabega with a maximum of 5 minutes. Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually appreciate that the conversation has already moved a lot of my points forward. I do understand that this is something that we're exploring, and also want to thank Mrs. Shear for, she's already implemented some of the clips throughout the week since the agenda was first out. And since this is going back to staff to organize and plan, I think I wanted to add a few comments that we should consider. I experience a lot of complaints in terms of the illegal parkings that happen on Dundas Street. I think Councillor Turner raised some points around the parking situation on Dundas, and currently it's just not working. There's a lot of illegal parkings that happen on the street, including I think we should include in the revision of the options that they could bring back to council, including a better loading zone plan and a better plan around where cars that do things like skip the dishes and Uber Eats can be parked versus where people who are just dropping into a store quickly can park. It is a flexible street, and the intent of it behind the design was to have a safer street that is more accessible to either pedestrian or people who have accessibility issues, cycling and all those stuff. So, and currently we have been experiencing for the last 2 years issues around figuring those pieces out, figuring out how we do the loading zone, the parking, and how we safely have people be on the street throughout the year, and not just during the times that we shut down, and which is also something that we have to consider when we're bringing in the bike lane, especially at this time of the year. We also have to consider about the safety issues that are going to rise when we need to close the street, or we need to temporarily use the street in full closures. I have heard a lot of comments around the design. So the paint, my concerns with the paint are also connected to the illegal parkings, because, or even the loading zone issue. When a loading truck is going to come and it's we have the paint there, it's going to be parked on the bike lane, and people are going to park on the bike lane when it's just paint, and it's going to cause more issues. So this specific plan as is, I don't think it solves it. And I think that Mrs. Shear has kind of spoken about taking back all that feedback and working with the businesses as well to figure out what's a better plan. I haven't spoken to the BIA. I did hear that they were conducting their own survey, but they'll share with us the information that they found. However, I do think that there's a lot of safety issues as well involved in the plan as presented to us, and I would encourage committee to explore more options, like ask our staff to just give us more options and not just one option, where we can get to see different options, and we get to pick from those different options. But the biggest concerns that I had with the plan is, one, the one-way street would also increase cars driving faster, which is also a safety issue. And I know that we have reduced the kilometers on Dundas Street, but there's still that issue of cars that drive really fast on the street. So I would really want to consider that, and then make sure that we are addressing all of the safety issues that could rise if we have the one-way street and the loading zone. The loading zone and the illegal parking is a big issue that we have faced from the beginning to now, and we continue to face. So I want to hear how we're going to address the loading zone and the parking before we provide, and I understand the equity issue involved in providing the 1 hour. However, I think there needs to be a better
30 seconds.
Do that. So anyways, thank you, Madam Chair.
Sorry, would staff like to answer the question from the councillor of just speaking about loading zone or loading zone enforcement, or how those work in general?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to provide a bit of clarity about what's being proposed related to parking. So there currently is 1 hour free parking. Vehicles can extend for an additional hour by paying. What we're proposing is limited simply to the 1 hour, at which point a vehicle would no longer be eligible to remain in that spot. The hope is to increase turnover and provide people with some short-term parking stopping opportunities. That said, I'm on the street frequently as well, and we do see some very interesting parking behavior. So I do have Stephen Miller from Parking Services on the call, and he may be able to provide some insight on to their strategies related to enforcement of parking in general and the loading zones.
Thank you. And through the chair, we do actively enforce loading zones on the street in Dundas Place. Currently, our practice is to give 20 minutes of observation to determine whether active loading or unloading is happening. If there's no active loading or unloading observed, then our officers will take applicable enforcement action. We do have officers on foot in the area, so they can monitor the area quite frequently, and we will continue to do that under the proposed changes.
Councillor, you have 30 seconds remaining.
Thank you. Just two quick questions. So I wanted to ask about the activation the active transportation person who was supposed to be hired, when that's going to happen. And my second question would be around how we plan after the construction, how we plan to connect both ends of the Dundas Place construction. So how are we going to plan the cycling on both ends after the construction?
Perfect. And to staff with the update of the active transportation manager hiring process, and then the activation of the street.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So with respect to the active transportation manager process, we are in the shortlist stage of recruitment. So we've gone through screening and we're going through preliminary interviews at this point, and we should hopefully have an announcement fairly shortly. So we're going into a second round in that selection process. Just to clarify on the other question, was the question about how we're going to activate the street and how this infrastructure would work, or how we would connect it to the permanent cycle infrastructure on the east and west ends?
No, it's to understand how we're going to have the cycling plan, how it's going to connect on both ends of the street after construction.
Thank you for the clarification, Councillor. One of the reasons that staff have been suggesting that we would have a one-way cycle lane on either side, north and south of Dundas Place, is because the connections to the TVP section and to the Old East section are much simpler. You're continuing in unidirectional travel, and it connects quite easily. There's a bit of signal work that would have to be done, and we would have to provide obviously way marking through those intersections, but certainly it is much easier transition than if we were to provide a single space with bidirectional bike traffic in it and then have to split off one of those directions at the intersections. So that would be part of the implementation to ensure that there's those connections now. Ultimately, when all the construction is done, Dundas Place did not include dedicated bike lanes. There's work to be done as to the longer term solution, and what we're looking at now is just the one-year pilot to accommodate construction.
Thank you to staff for that. I have Councillor Lewis next for a 5-minute maximum, and then anyone who would like to speak after that. Councillor Lewis, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I promise I won't need 5 minutes. Most of the questions I had have already been asked by colleagues, and I really appreciate Councillor Kayabega asking about the update on the active transportation manager, because that was one of the questions on my list. So glad to hear that that's moving ahead. I will share that I am always a little hesitant when I see pilot and when I see temporary in things. The one thing that I've heard so far from cyclists, from the business community, and even from people in my own ward who have particular shops downtown that they do like to visit, is that nobody's happy with this plan. Maybe that's actually a good indication. When we've made nobody happy, maybe we've come up with the best balance possible. I don't know whether that's the case or not, though. So I am glad to hear that some more consultation is going to be involved here. I'm really hesitant to approve, anything that hasn't really had a good consultation in that regard. I will say that moving ahead, I like Councillor Kayabaga's suggestion about showing us 2 or 3 options so that we have a better sense. I appreciate what Mr. McCrae was trying to convey verbally about different options, but it was hard to visualize some of what he was trying to communicate there. And I'm just going to end with reminding Mr. McCrae that it's now March the 2nd, and the Toronto Maple Leafs are in first place. So he may want to be planning for a Dundas Place activation for a Stanley Cup party rather than a Raptors NBA party.
Thank you for your optimism about your hockey team. I have Councillor Helmer next, followed by Councillor Cassidy. Please proceed.
I think we should be taking advantage of the fact that we have a flex street to put something in for the construction period that's going to provide better protection for cyclists. I think there's a variety of ways to do that. And one of the things that's great about the flex street is that we really have a lot of options, and it's not going to be expensive to provide a cycling facility. I think the idea that we can set up some planters and create a space for that to happen safely, I think that's really good from a value for money perspective and a safety improvement per dollar perspective. It's going to be excellent. I also think we can try a couple of different things and see how it works. We're not stuck with curbs. We don't have to do things that are really expensive when we're into the roadway. And I think bringing it up in the report, as staff have done here, is a good way to get the discussion going on what's the best way to do that. Personally, I think the idea of taking a full lane and have it be bidirectional for cyclists is probably the best and most intuitive way. The street is quite different from the rest of downtown. I think cyclists can easily transition at the intersections back into the unidirectional lanes. And I think even if you think about the end of the streets, if you just had a barrier that was blocking vehicles but not blocking cyclists, that would be a very easy way to get in and out of the street and the bidirectional lanes transitioning at the intersection. So I think all that can be worked out in talking with the advisory committees and figuring out the plan between now and the 30th of March. So I certainly support the recommendation from staff. I think the input from the business owners who are downtown is going to be important. I'm not really convinced on the parking side of things, but I don't think it's a huge impact one way or the other. And I'm willing to try it and see how it goes compared to what we have been doing so far with Hawk Mobile, which I think for the most part has been pretty successful. So on those 2 issues, I'm willing to support the direction to staff. I think we could see the design. I do think there's more than one way to do that well. And I hope that we'll make liberal use of those planters, things that we can put on the street and then move around, but also that provide clear indication of what is for vehicles and what is for not and what is not, because I do think we have seen significant confusion when there's a flex street with no boundaries at all. People are parking vehicles in very strange places. And I don't want to see that happen when space is even more at a premium and King Street is under construction.
Perfect. Thank you for those comments. Quick question to staff, as Councillor Helmer referenced the planters. Does the city already have enough planters for this project, or would those need to be procured?
Thank you, Ms. Chair. The city does have some and is planning to purchase some more. And yes, those would be able to be used for this project and repurposed on future projects. So there's no throwaway cost. The cost of the pilot project is generally low cost, and the pavement markings are temporary. So it's like a tape kind of product. So it's adaptable and it's not locking into any sort of long-term fixed infrastructure.
Thank you for that. Councillor Cassidy, please proceed.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So I have a question for staff. Recognizing that this is a pilot project and recognizing, of course, it's a pilot project because it's because of construction that's presumably not going to last forever. But what is the plan after 2021? Because will this street be complete after 2021, or will construction continue into 2022?
To staff?
The current pilot project is proposed in direct response to the concerns that we've heard, and specifically with respect to the displacement of the temporary King Street bike lane. So it's a response to that. As mentioned earlier, right? We're going to certainly consult and monitor and see how it works, and that will inform future decisions, future years of construction in the core. There are some more years where we've rebuilt almost all of the core, but we still have a few more years to go. The specific impacts and how that influences Dundas Place will be considered specifically for future years, but we feel like this current pilot project can help inform potential future solutions without any sort of long-term commitment, and remaining adaptable.
Okay, thank you. Another question is, as part of the core area action plan, one aspect of it was increased presence of bylaw enforcement officers downtown. A lot of questions have gone around the parking and people parking illegally, or staying too long, or doing things that they're not supposed to do, parking in bike lanes, stopping in bike lanes. Will there be increased enforcement during this time, during this construction season, and will they be actively enforcing our parking bylaws?
To staff?
Mr. Miller, would you like to respond?
Yes, thank you. And through the chair, we do have officers actively on foot within the vicinity of Dundas Place. That will continue, and we will be actively enforcing these bike lanes as proposed.
Okay. So one final question to Ms. Scher. Given Part A and how it's written, and you've heard the comments from some of the committee members, is there a need to change anything in Part A for us to be specific or prescriptive, or will you come back on March 30th with a report that has options?
Ms. Scher?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Certainly, we can provide details as to the options that have been considered so far. Noting this is a pilot project to support construction, to get into a very lengthy public consultation, design, option review process, we could lose a lot of the summer season prior to implementing a change. But we will provide, as part of the report, or appendices to which options have been considered and the rationale for selections or decisions that were made. We'll also, as committed to the mayor, include any information required from our consultation process. And I apologize for my dog weighing in.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. So just a couple of comments. I'm happy with the options that we have before us, and I just want to caution committee members that I agree that we should be looking at a couple of different options. I agree with the concerns about that have been raised by the Cycling Advisory Committee regarding the safety of cyclists and all of that. But we're looking at a construction season for cars, for pedestrians, for anybody dealing with especially downtown construction. We always have detours, we always have temporary setups, and this is what this will be. That's why I shudder a little bit at the use of the word pilot, because I understand that pilot will help us to see how we go further in other areas downtown during different construction seasons. I get that. So this will inform us and help us to respond appropriately. But I worry that we seek an absolutely perfect plan, it won't pass. And so somebody's going to lose if we seek a perfect plan, and it will either be cyclists, and most likely it will be cyclists, or it will be businesses, or it will be drivers of motor vehicles. And I remember when we did the temporary bike lanes on King Street, I think that vote was extremely close. So I just want to caution committee members who don't want any plan that isn't perfect. We're not going to have a perfect plan because we're trying to satisfy a whole bunch of different interests, and some of them are competing interests. So I support the motion. I support getting a report on March 30th, and I'm happy to hear that there will be more consultation taking place. But I also hear Ms. Scher's caution that going into a very robust community engagement process will take us far into the construction season, and we will lose what we could have gained.
Thank you, Mayor Holder.
Thanks very much. I appreciate what Councillor Cassidy has just said, Chair. And it's not about getting a solution; it's getting the best solution that we can under the circumstances. And I know we'd all agree on that. So that's not at risk. I'm troubled by A because pilot project typically means we'll see how it goes and keep it going. And that's typically what a pilot project is always intended to do. It doesn't say a temporary bicycle lane on Dundas. So I'm going to emphasize the point that Councillor Cassidy did, maybe with a different intent. Pilot project is exactly what it is intended to be. See how it works, to see how we can replicate it. And that's, if I have a concern, it would be that. The second part I have is this. I've heard everything about cycling and the most modest piece about the impacts of the business community. And why do we do Dundas Place? It's a meeting place. It's a place where all people can come together for all sorts of perspectives, reasons, and sometimes we'll close the street, sometimes we won't. It'll have the flexibility that Councillor Helmer made absolute reference to, and he's correct. I look at this and I think, you know, where's the voice of the business community? And you know, where I struggle with this, with A, is that it's to me, it's quite prescriptive, both in the reference to pilot project, implied or otherwise, and the fact that we're talking about bike lanes, and I don't have any feedback that I believe we need to have from the business community to make an informed and thoughtful decision. I'm encouraged by what Ms. Scher said, that we'll be reaching out to them and getting some perspective, but I don't see it there. And on the second, the idea of, to me, that's not material, whether it's 1 hour or 2 hours. Some like it separated so they could vote against it at all. But I mean, we either want to have cars or choose to have cars on Dundas Street, including Dundas Place, or we don't. And there may well be some who have a view and that we don't. So quick question, if I can, to Ms. Scher, what are the implications of just maintaining the status quo?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Certainly maintaining the status quo is an option. We don't believe it provides a level of protection to support safe cycling connections, given the other east-west traffic impacts through the downtown. And we do believe that some prudent course of action should be pursued. However, that is certainly at the discretion of council.
And so then my follow-up, if I can, thank you, Ms. Scher, through you, Chair, is that, so what other alternatives did staff consider for this 1 year project, perhaps potentially other routes and other streets, as they came to the conclusion that this would be the right response at this time?
Madam Chair, I can certainly start. Mr. McCray may be able to weigh in. I know he's got a family commitment he may have to leave us for. We have considered the provision of either one-way or bi-directional routes on York. The traffic impacts and the need for significant protection and investment, given the speeds and volumes there, ruled that out as a temporary facility. We have had discussions about whether or not Dufferin would be a proximate enough location. There are, again, significant parking impacts of going to Dufferin. We also believe a detour cyclists a long way from their desire lines, as well as the connection between the Old East and TVP Dundas connections for cycling infrastructure. We have looked at a request to see traffic turn at every intersection, so no through traffic. Sorry about that. She has lots of opinions on bikes too, apparently. So no through traffic permitted through Dundas Place for vehicles. We feel that the impacts on business would be challenging in terms of circulation and the ability to find and access loading and parking. We did examine the bi-directional facility on Dundas Place. So there may be a few more that I've missed there, but there were a number that were considered. We still have some space to adjust the design as outlined, but we do believe that the separated facility is likely going to provide us the best temporary solution for all parties.
So through you, Chair, and this may finally be where I am on this, but and thank you for bringing, I think it's Charlie the dog's voice in on this perspective, Ms. Scher. So I'm looking at this, and trying to decide what the right thing to do is for everyone. And I guess in terms of how trying to find the right way to support the staff direction, I guess if I had absolute confidence either in the motion or I would certainly accept it through Mr. McCray and you, Ms. Chair, that you will receive strong input from the business community. I keep coming back to that because it's the piece I don't hear. But if I had absolute confidence that, or assurance, I suppose, that will be factored into the recommendation, or that we'll be able to vote on in a month's time, I could probably get there. It's just the piece that I think is absolutely missing, and maybe you can just give me some confidence or assurance, if you don't mind, please.
Yep, to staff.
Madam Chair, I can assure you we will be having those conversations with the BIA and the business community. Certainly in the consideration of the alternatives that I recently just outlined for you in my last response, the reason that some of them are not going to work are the needs to support businesses and their need for access, loading, parking. So you have my assurance that that will form part of the information that comes back, along with consultation with the cycling community, and we can provide you with a summary or appendices that shows all of the options that were considered and their impacts, both in terms of cycling safety, effectiveness of that facility, impacts on events, and on the business community.
So, Chair, finally, through to Ms. Chair, in no way ever would I challenge the integrity of our staff, ever. And I'm grateful for that assurance, and I want to say thank you. I think it's important as we move forward in terms of what the right direction is. So, Mr. McCray, thank you, and Ms. Chair, thank you. Chair, enough thank you. So, thank you.
Thank you. I'll recognize Deputy Mayor Morgan. 5 minutes maximum, please.
Thank you. I'll try to figure out how to put my hand down. Oh, there we go. Yes, thank you. I'll be brief. So I wanted to weigh in on this because it's a bit of an awkward spot for me, given when I look at what's being suggested, and we're considering directing a bylaw to come forward at the March 30th Civic Works Committee. Well, the recommendation from this committee isn't even going to be approved at council until the 23rd, and the report will already be written by then for the 30th. So I thought it might be important for me to share some thoughts now, given it might be a moot point by the time I get to vote on it at council. And I think that makes this whole thing a little bit awkward for me. And perhaps on the best thing to do is to just receive it and let staff continue the consultation and work that is going to occur regardless of what is decided on this, since it won't be decided upon until the 23rd. And, I think the councillors have made some feedback about wanting to see options, wanting to see consultation. And I think that can just occur with the staff doing their work on this, rather than us getting bogged down in a specific direction about bringing forward a bylaw on a pilot project, because again, that work will be complete and the report will be written by the time this even gets to council. So that's the awkwardness of this for me. I think that the feedback is important here. I will say my own opinion on this. I recall the discussion and the vote on the King Street bike lane. I recall getting some criticism from the cycling community after having voted for a cycling piece of infrastructure, and I'm not going to do that again. I'm not going to support things until I see that that consultation has happened, and that both the cycling committee and the downtown BIA have shared their thoughts into whatever options are being recommended. So, I'm pretty good with B. I think that can come forward at the March 23rd council meeting. I think it's a reflection of what staff have been doing operationally anyways. But as for A, I would suggest we could just receive A and let staff do the work, and they'll come back on the 30th with the report that we'll see, probably the day of the council meeting.
Thank you for joining us and making those comments. Looking to committee to see if there's any other questions or comments to staff. Okay. So we have Mayor Holder, and then I will need a mover and a seconder for this motion or an alternative one, recognizing A and B can easily be separated. Mr. Mayor.
Thanks very much. I certainly would like to separate A and B, but I would like to change A to be received and to be referred further to a future meeting, but just to be received at this point. In the spirit of the deputy mayor's comments, I think that's that needs to be considered.
Okay, so the mayor's moving, B is fine, but A to be received. And then, Mr. Mayor, just for clarification for the clerks of directed to, I'll ask if what clarification they're looking for. Okay, so strictly just to receive for A, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, thank you. Knowing that it will be brought back forward after the appropriate consultation has taken place.
Okay, so that's been moved. I would need a seconder for that. Seconded by Councillor Van Meerbergen. So the clerks are just changing that wording, that A would be to receive. I'll start a speakers list on that. I have Councillor Helmer, followed by Councillor Turner.
Thanks for dropping into the meeting near the end, Deputy Mayor Morgan. I'm trying to understand where exactly this is taking us. So we're trying to talk through whether we're going to have a temporary bike lane on Dundas Place this summer. The direction that's been recommended by staff is to have them come forward at the next Civic Works meeting with the details of that. I would like that to happen. So I would like to vote for that here at committee and then also at council. Now, of course, if other people on council don't want to see a temporary bike lane on Dundas Place, then council is going to decide that at the meeting on the 23rd. But I don't see why at committee we should just be receiving the report and not making a decision about what we want to recommend to council. The question that's in front of us is, do you want to do a temporary bike lane on Dundas Place this summer? If you do, then you should vote for the direction so we can see what the details are and staff can go ahead and do that work to consult the advisory committees. I think they're doing the appropriate thing. They're coming forward now to see if we are interested in that project. If you're not interested in that project, then don't support it at committee and don't support it at council, and staff won't do it and it won't happen. But I don't understand what the value is in receiving it now, making no decision now at committee about what the recommendation will be, and then having the same discussion at council, which we're going to do one way or the other. We're on the exact same timeline, and all we're doing is just not making a decision at committee about what we're going to recommend. So I just don't understand it. I do hear what Councillor Morgan is saying, or Deputy Mayor Morgan is saying around the timing. So staff are going to work away at a report. They're going to come forward with that report. But unless we're talking about delaying things beyond the next meeting of Civic Works, then that's going to happen anyway. They just have to start writing the report immediately after the council meeting. So I guess if what we're trying to accomplish is a delay, so push everything off a full cycle, this makes sense. But if we're not trying to accomplish a delay, I just don't see the value in receiving it now and not just making a recommendation about, do you want to have staff work on the temporary bike lane on Dundas Place?
Perfect. Thank you for that. I have Councillor Turner and then Councillor Cassidy, and then I'll go to other visiting members.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll echo Councillor Helmer's comments here. Without direction, then what are staff doing really? The direction provides them the opportunity to go and do the consultations that have been spoken of and provide that input and feedback to us when it comes back to us at the next cycle. So yeah, I can't support the recommendation that Mayor Holder is. I think A needs to move forward as it's written in the staff recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Cassidy. Councillor Cassidy, you're muted, and then I have Councillor Deputy Mayor Morgan next.
Thanks. So the recommendation in the report is that Civic Administration be directed to bring forward a report to the March 30th meeting. So whether they start writing the report today or after the next meeting of council, they've told us today in this meeting that they will be bringing us various options on how this pilot project would proceed. So, Councillor Helmer has laid it out very clearly as either you want a pilot project, you want some kind of temporary cycling accommodation made on Dundas Place during the construction season, or you do not. And by passing this, by passing this at the next council meeting next week, then staff will begin working on that report, which will contain the various options and all of the concerns that have been raised today about consulting with the business community, doing more consultation with the community at large or whoever they need to consult with. Staff have assured us that those consultations will take place and they'll provide committee and council with various options. So Councillor Councillor Helmer is correct. The option today is very clear. Do we want staff to proceed and provide us with a report that will lay out various options for some temporary accommodation for all users of the road on Dundas Place during the construction season of 2021? Or do we not want that to happen? And I think we want that to happen, at least I do, and that's how I would like to vote.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Morgan.
Yes, so I'm going to sound a little bit frustrated with this because my point is not is being misinterpreted. The point I'm trying to make is I do not think it matters whether it is received or directed. Like the way the reports are due, this report, including the parking and traffic bylaw to create a temporary cycling project on Dundas Lane be brought forward for the meeting, will be written and done by the time that council authorizes that direction. So, you know, vote for it or not, that's going to be done and over. And so, you know, whether the mayor's motion passes or whether he withdraws it and you just vote on the regular direction, my frustration here is staff are going to do what you're suggesting anyways. Like staff are going to continue the consultation. They're going to have to do that because to write the report to be ready for March 30th, and it's due, like it'll be public the day after the council meeting and it'll be written by the council meeting day. So like, it just seems to me a very odd order. And I appreciate that Councillor Helmer recognizes that. I do have a desire to support a temporary cycling solution. I'm just a little bit frustrated that if I didn't weigh in at this committee today and I weighed in at council, I'd be reading a digital report in the afternoon that day, going to council and then debating something that is already done. And that's frustrating to me. So I'm expressing my frustration today about the order of operations here. I think staff should proceed. My only concern is I like what Councillor Kayabaga said about having options. From the way that I heard Ms. Shore describe it, she's still going to bring forward a bylaw with a specific suggestion by the 30th. And then the report will reference the options. So that does not really make for easy decision-making. If you want something different than the recommended option, there probably should be a few bylaws for consideration, but like, I'm not looking to railroad this or send it anywhere else. I'm just a little bit frustrated by the order of operations on this particular report today. So that's my opinion, but I think we should proceed. I think the consultation should proceed. And, you know, it just seems to me like some of this is a moot point given the way that the reports line up with the council reporting out because of the timing this month.
Okay. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Morgan. I see no further hands raised of guests or of committee members. The motion has been moved and seconded. If there's nothing further, we can turn to e-scribe and proceed to vote. Councillor Cassidy.
So we can vote to receive. Can we, after we vote to receive, can somebody also make a motion that we proceed with the original A? Because we always had to receive this report.
Okay, just a moment, Councillor Cassidy. The clerk will clarify where we're at.
Thank you. Through the chair, we're currently at committee, so the complete motion is an ABC. If this motion were to fail, then we could entertain an alternate motion.
Would committee like the clerk to read out the motion of where we're at or to see it on the screen? Just for clarification, part C is to receive all the communications that have come in regards to this item before us. Councillor Cassidy, you had your hand up for a follow-up.
Well, the mayor expressed a desire or a willingness to separate the motion out. So why don't we do that instead of voting on the whole motion and have it fail and then create a new one? Why don't we go A, B, and C
Yeah, the clerk is preparing that now, looking to committee to see if there's anything further. Cool. Seeing nothing, we will get that wording up. Okay, the clerk will read it out as we go, just for those trying to follow along at home for clarity. And Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. I'd like to suggest an amendment, which is to proceed with the original staff recommendation as a Part D. So receiving the report is not really contrary to going ahead with the recommendation, which is what Councillor Cassidy was suggesting. So I think the way to resolve it is to have a vote on an amendment to the motion that's on the floor. And if that passes, then it's in, and then we can vote on the whole motion. If it doesn't pass, then we'll be dealing with just the receipt of the communications, the report, and the change to the parking.
Just looking to the clerk for direction and clarification. That would require a seconder. I see Councillor Turner.
Chair, I'd like to confirm that A, B, C, and D will be dealt with separately.
We just need to do the amendment first to add the Part D, and then once we find our way through there, then we can separate out other things as we desire. Okay. Describe, if you refresh your screens, it should come up. And at this point, the clerk will also read it out.
Through the chair, the amendment is to add the following new Part D to the motion. D, the Civic Administration be directed to bring forward a report to the March 30th, 2021 Civic Works Committee to amend the traffic and parking bylaw to create a temporary bicycle lane pilot project on Dundas Place during the 2021 construction season.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. E-scribe will be open for voting.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 4-2.
Okay, as the amendment has passed, we now have A, B, C, and D, which can be separated out as committee wills it. So looking to committee to see if you want all four of those separated out for the votes as we move through this, or just certain ones. Mr. Mayor.
Just a question. A is the amendment, or A is the original A, which is now D, which is passed. And if people's brains are hurting, it's understandable. But I just want to clarify which A we're referring to.
Okay, so the clerk confirms that we don't need to do D again because it is done. So she can read out A, B, and C, and then committee can decide if they want to separate out which pieces, if any.
Thank you. Through the chair, the motion reads that on the recommendation of the Managing Director, Environmental and Engineering Services and City Engineer, the following actions be taken with respect to the staff report dated March 2nd, 2021, related to the Dundas Place and temporary bicycle lanes and revised parking limits. Part A, the above noted staff report be received. Part B, the proposed bylaw as appended to the staff report be introduced at the municipal council meeting to be held on March 23rd, 2021 for the purpose of amending bylaw PS 113 entitled A Bylaw to Regulate Traffic and the Parking of Motor Vehicles in the City of London to replace the 2-hour paid parking with 1-hour free parking. And Part C, the communications as appended to the added agenda be received.
So looking to committee, see if they want A, B, or C separated out, or if we're good to deal with those together. And this motion has already been moved and seconded. So looking for any hands up of separating A, B, or C. If not, they will be called together. Sorry, Councillor Turner, please.
Chair, just as identified before, the parking one, please.
Okay, so B will be called separate and A and C will be together. Okay, eScribe will be opening. eScribe is now open for A and C.
Closing the vote, the motion.
Okay. B will now be put forward as it's already been moved and seconded, and will be opening briefly in eScribe. It is now up in eScribe.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 5-1.
Thank you for that discussion. Moving on to item 2.10, which is the community employment benefits. I'll ask staff to give a brief update as this, I believe, is just to be received. And then we also have 2 delegations that last I heard they were waiting with us. And hopefully okay, I see a nod that they are still with us for when we make a decision on delegation status. So to staff, just to recommend or introduce this to committee.
Thank you. Through the chair, Jenny Dan here. As a requirement of our ICIP funding, all of our projects over $10 million with federal contributions are required to participate in a community employment benefits initiative. So the goal of the initiative is to leverage infrastructure investments to achieve social and economic value in the community so that public infrastructure investment benefits, those benefits are seen in the communities and the neighborhoods where the infrastructure is being built. So the city has taken an initial approach to this, where our first efforts at developing a CEB strategy will hopefully kind of bring us into this new territory and bring lessons learned that can be carried forward into new projects. The Downtown Loop Phase 1 contract was just awarded, and it'll be our first contract that applies this new community employment benefit framework. So I'm happy to answer any questions from the committee.
Okay, so the committee is welcome to ask questions of staff now. If not, we can hear from our delegations and approve their requests, and then have a conversation following that. So I would need a mover and a seconder for to accept the 2 delegations. We have the Middleton United Way of Middlesex and they are here as far as I know, and Inclusive Economy London in Region is here as well. I have a mover and seconder, my goodness. Mayor Holder moves, I would still need a seconder. Councillor Van Meerbergen seconds. The vote will be opening in eScribe in a moment to receive those delegations. The vote is open.
Closing the 6-0.
Thank you for committee members. Their requests are, I want to read their comments as they go along. We will now turn to committee room number 5 for our delegations. Just please announce yourself, your name, what organization you are representing, and you have 5 minutes. Please proceed.
Hi everyone, it's Sarah Middleton. I'm here on behalf of United Way Elgin Middlesex, where I'm the Director of Community Impact, as well as Inclusive Economy London Region. I'm the co-lead of the Community Benefits Action Table with that organization. On behalf of these organizations, I want to commend the City of London on moving forward this plan for community employment benefits as part of these upcoming infrastructure projects, and highlight as well a growing local interest and support for this work. Outcomes achieved through community benefit agreements like this can support strategic goals that we share, both City Council and United Way, such as reducing poverty and increasing the number of job opportunities available to people who often face systemic barriers to employment. Inclusive Economy London and Region is a network of organizations and individuals organizing to activate community economic development practices that will address poverty, social exclusion, and sustainability. We believe this work is an important part of our community's recovery from COVID-19, and we have made several submissions to the London Community Recovery Network, including one about developing a community benefits framework for the City of London and other anchor institutions. I mention this because the London Community Recovery Network has positioned economic recovery side by side with social recovery. And likewise, CEB and other community benefits are a way for us to achieve both social and economic outcomes. Inclusive Economy London, formed in 2019, developed an action plan in 2020, and we're now implementing that plan. There are over 30 organizations engaged in the network. Most recently, we are convening some conversations with a series or a number of key stakeholders, specifically about community benefits. These conversations have been attended by folks from the employment sector, organized labor, the construction industry, advocates, and other local organizations. The goal of the meetings is to increase common and develop a common local understanding of community benefits and create a stronger voice in our community to inform and support this work moving forward. As you can tell, the group is quite a good cross-section of stakeholders. And as we work with and connect with other communities, we know it reflects the type of actors who are part of community benefit networks in other municipalities. And so we want to let you know and encourage you to recognize that this group has much to offer the future of this work in London, including the report you're considering today. As I mentioned, we've talked to a lot of groups from other municipalities, and what we've learned is that this work really requires external stakeholders. In most municipalities where the work's been successful, there is a community group convened specifically to help inform and build capacity to implement agreements of this type and provide information about needs and opportunities, as well as ongoing insight about evaluation and metrics of success. The report you're considering today highlights that city staff has consulted with several groups in developing this strategy. Our organization, United Way, as well as a number of partners within Inclusive Economy London, are really thankful for having been part of that consultation and having the opportunity to provide input in developing the process and the appendix that's part of the report. We acknowledge that consideration has been given to existing employment pathways and networks within our city, including the Job Developers Network. So we want to thank you and city staff for your support of this effort to include and embed community employment benefits in this project. And we are also encouraged to see that there's a willingness to consider additional aspects of community benefits in the future, including a framework and social procurement. And so we will look forward to this work continuing together, seeing CEB and community benefits incorporated in new and other future projects. And we really encourage you to consider Inclusive Economy London and its members, including United Way, as willing partners in this work, along with that growing base of organizations and individuals. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Middleton, for your patience in being here today and joining us and bringing those words in regards to community employment benefits and what the organizations have been doing and meeting behind the scenes as it ties into the London Community Recovery Network, jobs, and thank you for tying that together. I know you're working so hard behind the scenes and it does not go unrecognized, so thank you so much. Is there anyone else to speak from Committee Room 5? Mr. Corey? Thank you for being with us today. Please introduce yourself, your organization, and please note you also have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing us to speak today. My name is Michael Corey, and I'm here today representing the Inclusive Economy London Community Benefits Action Table. As you just heard from Sarah Middleton comments, this group has a keen interest in supporting a strong community benefits agenda in London and supporting the capacity building and readiness of industry, labor, community organizations, and employment sector to respond to these opportunities. I'd also like to echo Sarah's comments about the support and gratitude to city staff and councillors for taking leadership in developing a community benefits strategy. In my submission, I basically go over some recommendations or things to consider more as we've reflected on the staff report that's come forward. And as I dig into those, I just want to say that, a large part of community benefit agreements is about utilizing already existing resources in the city and public institutions to incentivize innovation in the private sector. And so therefore, in these agreements, we need to have strong, we need to create a competitive environment for industry to bid on these projects in ways that fulfill community benefits as much as possible. So these recommendations are sort of trying to start to talk about how can we build that up a bit. So the first one is that we should think about increasing the target set for hiring through community employment benefits closer to 20% of total wages. We believe the current target set of 5% of total wages does not reflect national best practices for CEBs and community benefits. For example, the city of Surrey, BC has a target of 20 to 30% of all wages for CEBs. The Gordie Howe International Bridge Community Benefit Agreement has a target of 20% of new hires. And the Woodbine Casino has a target of 40% of new hires in their community benefits plans. Connected to this, increasing our desire for where the money is on wages is also to increase the emphasis on social procurement among bidders in the CEB process. At this point, there are no requirements in the rapid transit project to measure this aspect of the CEBs. A component of CEB policy is to increase purchasing from small businesses and social enterprises. We believe that with a small adjustment in RFX language and weighting, that subcontracting to small businesses and social enterprises in London would be encouraged. Moving to recommendation 2, which kind of ties in a little bit more, is that we suggest structuring the qualification tender bid documents and evaluation criteria so that they include a scoring system that gives points to proponents for how they respond to community benefits. Some of the folks we consulted with suggest a minimum of 10% of the evaluation criteria should be on the social aspect of these, how people respond. For example, one question evaluated on an RFP could read, explain how through this project, you will maximize community employment benefits. How will procurement and subcontracting from SMEs and social enterprises and hiring and training programs be built into these projects? So what you're doing there is you're opening it up for the contractors to sort of perform, and how good can they do to set their own targets in the community benefits as well. With the current proposal, there's no points awarded to bidders based on their enthusiasm or capacity for fulfilling community benefit agreements. Therefore, there is little incentive to change industry practices in ways that create longer term transformations and benefits. So now moving from the points and what kind of targets to set into, well, how are we as a community able to facilitate and create community readiness to do good, to be able to deliver these community benefits? And this relates to Sarah's comments around, well, the community can actually help and create readiness among industry leaders, employment sector, all that, to actually move forward. So recommendation 3 suggests that we should actually fund the development of a community benefits network or other capacity building activities for CEBs in the city. A community benefits network is generally an external group to the city for the purposes of informing community benefit practices, including implementing, creating readiness and pipelines, employment pipelines, and the rest of it. Recommendation 3A says, well, how would you go about funding this? And again, I think we could actually fund this without allocating too much more resources or money. Consider reallocating the cash allowance connected to the CEBs to the formation of a community benefits network. And through our work, we've identified existing employment pipelines that would be able to provide on-site support for hires through the CEB program. The cash allowance idea, as per the staff report, appears to be a duplication of existing funding
30 seconds.
Resources already allocated. The cash allowance may also undermine the importance of encouraging contractors industry to build relationships with employment sector organizations, as has been discussed at these committees and council before. Lastly, we request that the committee ask staff to continue to work with Inclusive Economy London to address these 3 recommendations for implementing community employment benefits program at the City of London. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Corey, for being here with us today and your work behind the scenes on getting ready for today's delegation status and your work in seeing how we can actually be more inclusive and move some of these things forward. At this point, if committee has questions for our delegates, we're welcome to ask them, as they are physically here with us, just in another room. So if you wanted to raise your hand that I could see you, we could recognize any questions to our delegates. And if not, we will let them get on with their days. Okay, seeing no questions from committee to the delegates, I thank the delegates for their attendance today and noted that their advanced submissions are in the added package and will be on record, that we can refer to it in the future. So thank you for being here with us today. To committee, the item before us is to be received and the communications from our delegates that we just heard from as well. I would need a mover and a seconder for that, and then any other questions or comments from committee regarding this item. I have moved by Councillor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Turner. Looking for any comments, Councillor Helmer.
Thank you, and I really appreciate the delegations. Thanks for making the time to speak to the committee. Through the chair to staff, I'm wondering if you could just give us a sense of the range. A number of examples were cited by Mr. Curry about the percentage of hires in different projects and places. And I know that the report is talking about 5% as a reasonable number. I wonder if you could give us a bit more detail about what you are seeing among municipalities throughout the country.
Ms. Dan?
Yep. Through the chair, what we found when we were researching this was that most of the existing examples represented multi-billion-dollar private-public partnership procurements, or examples where there were more operational hires. When you have the scale of these multi-billion-dollar P3 projects, their approach to incorporating CEBs didn't really translate well to London's rapid transit projects, because our projects are going to be delivered as individual projects using a traditional design bid build tender process. So because we found that most of those examples didn't really quite fit our situation, we really had to develop a Made in London framework and establish targets that were appropriate for the scale and the procurement approach that we were taking. So when we've had some discussions with construction industry, that's where we came up with a suggestion of 5% of labor costs being a reasonable starting point. You know, each of our individual contracts, for example, the Downtown Loop project is about $8 million, and we're dealing with a much smaller scale of project. And so you really have to reduce your economies of scale to start with. And again, this is really a starting point for us. We definitely know that we can go up from there, but I think that we want to establish, I guess, reasonable targets to start off at this initial step.
If there's a follow-up, please go ahead, Councillor Helmer. And if anyone else would like to speak, please raise your hand so I can recognize you next.
Yeah, just a brief follow-up. So in terms of the kinds of projects that we're talking about under the Investing in Canada program, are there examples of these projects that are sort of similar in magnitude that are underway now? I imagine some of them haven't been tendered yet, but I imagine everybody is kind of working through the same issues at the same time. And do you get a sense of what other municipalities are targeting for things that are not the really large, like Gordie Howe Bridge? That's a very large project, something that is significant, but not in the billions of dollars.
Through the chair, honestly, I think that we might be sort of leading the edge on this one. We haven't been able to find really too many similar approaches, which is why we've really come up with our own solution as an initial framework, with the goal of watching what happens with the coming contracts. Because of the approach that we're taking of breaking our larger projects into individual contracts each year, we're going to have a growing number of contracts. So 2021, we've got phase 1 of Downtown Loop. By 2022, we'll have Downtown Loop phase 2 plus East phase 1. And then by the time we get to 23, we'll have 3 different contracts going each year for RT projects. Adelaide project is also a part of this CEB program as well. So I think we're going to have lots of examples to grow from and be able to kind of learn and adjust as we go.
Thank you.
Okay, looking for any other questions or comments from committee before we go to vote? Okay, seeing none, eScribe will be opening in a moment for voting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Item 2.11 is the 2020 external audit for London's drinking water quality management system and the 2020 management review. There was no irregularities in this. Mr. Mathers is with us if there's questions, but it was pulled by Councillor Turner because he has a conflict. So if there's any questions or comments from committee, we can certainly take those, but I would need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Helmer, seconded by, this could be you. Need a seconder? Mr. Mayor, thank you. Any questions or comments from committee? Seeing none, it will be opening in eScribe for voting with a conflict declared by Councillor Turner.
Zero with 1 abstain.
Perfect. Good job. That concludes our consent items. Moving into schedule items, we do have a delegation with us in Committee Room 5, being Ms. Brown from the Blue Community Committee. So looking for a motion to, oh, I don't have to sorry. Okay, sorry, she was approved from a prior committee meeting, so we don't need a motion to do that, but we can turn to Committee Room 5. And please try to keep to the 5-minute time lot, and then we'll proceed from there. And welcome.
Welcome. Thank you, Madam Chair. Lynn Brown, I'm the chair of the Blue Community Committee for the London chapter of the Council of Canadians, asking this committee to consider voting in favor of London's becoming a blue community, which is a Canadian initiative, began in 2009. And it's an initiative that seeks to enshrine water as a common resource or gift, as a public trust, placing public interests before for-profit interests, where decisions are made by our elected folks as opposed to for-profit decision makers. This project was presented to this committee 2 years ago and narrowly voted down because of some concerns that arose. I'm hoping to allay those concerns today. A blue community makes 3 resolutions, and the first of those is a resolution to declare water and water sanitation services a human right, which means that the city or any municipality will refrain from shutting off water for residences where there is a genuine difficulty in paying their water bill. This was a concern last time round, and I want to try and reassure you with these comments. The city has a very well-developed plan, as you probably know, to deal with those people in residence who are having genuine difficulty with water bills. Also, it is extremely rare for water services to be turned off in Canada, and it never happens in Quebec or British Columbia. No blue community has ever lost its designation because of a spike in unpaid water bills. And our understanding is that this resolution does not affect the city operationally or in terms of cost. The next resolution is one where the city agrees to ban the sale of single-use plastic bottled water. This was something of a concern 2 years ago, but I think what was lost sight of is the fact that the city made that decision 12 years ago and has made all the necessary accommodations. So they are already meeting this standard beautifully and progressively. And the city staff have rewarded this resolution, so it is quite comfortable for the city, and it has certainly passed muster with the National Office of the Council of Canadians. And the third resolution, a blue community resolves to oppose privatization of essential water services in any form. We understand London's relationship with the Joint Board of Water Supply, and it is passed the National Council of Canadians office also and found to be in keeping. So essentially, London is already there and poised to join 47 other Canadian communities and 78 around the world who choose to take a stand around these values. Please note that we have letters of support from the Federation of the Sisters of St. Joseph, the Urban League of London, Climate Action London, the London District Labour Council. And please know that we also have something in the order of 668 petition votes supporting that they request that London consider becoming a blue community. So essentially, in closing, London's practices are in keeping with the values of a blue community, and the Council of Canadians would like to recognize that. We think that this is a series of resolutions that are very much in keeping with London's direction, making housing a human right, that no one is left behind, that we're doing those things that we need to do to survive. So I hope you will see this as a benefit to London with no cost, and that what London would be doing is making a little more formal what they are already standing for and doing. And to borrow from our Indigenous neighbors, it would be a recognition and a protection that water is life. How did I do with the time?
You did excellent at 4 minutes and 39 seconds.
Yeah,
well polished, and thank you so much for your patience in being here today, recognizing today was a lengthy meeting, and your patience in waiting with us. At this point, I would ask the vice chair to please take the chair, as I have a motion I would like to put on the floor.
Madam Chair, looking at my speakers list, you're next.
Perfect. Thank you, presiding officer. I will need a seconder for this. The motion wording was sent around in advance. This came through Civic Works in a prior year as noted. The committee had great interest in it and support of it, but a few legal concerns with the wording at the time that prevented us from moving forward in those aspects, mainly around water shutoff billing and what happens if people on vast majority decide not to pay. Councillor Van Holst at the time added to that conversation as he had experience with the hydro board and raised some of those concerns. Over the last year and a bit, have worked with the residents to find a way forward on this motion, and with staff, you'll notice today we have a staff report in regards to this as well, that they are in support of it and worked on the wording as well, that we're recognizing that water is sacred. It is a human right, and it's only affecting people who would have an inability to pay their bills, would not have their water shut off. That the city already has funding programs set up with partner agencies to help those who just need help paying that to keep their water on. The city is already doing that. As noted, the sale of single-use water bottles aren't available in city properties when the city administers that, or in city vending machines. That was brought in by a former council back in 2008. And the resolution that water remained to being publicly owned and financed. We have 2 water boards, one of which I serve on, and that is already ours, and we just confirmed that we're going to keep those. There's 174 cities across Canada that have become blue communities. Kingston, Hamilton, Elmer are some of the ones that we might be familiar with. Staff have noted that there is no additional cost to the city to move forward with this. So the motion before you is just reaffirming that we're going to do the provision of water is a human right, and water will be provided to all residents despite their ability to pay for this service. The sale of bottled water will continue to be restricted in City of London facilities. The water and wastewater systems that provide services to residents will continue to be publicly owned and operated. Certainly during a pandemic, we've seen firsthand that proper access to clean water and proper sanitation is instrumental in public health. So looking to colleagues for a seconder on this motion.
Looking for a seconder. We have Mayor Holder. Thank you. Any further discussion? Councillor Helmer.
Thank you to the delegation and to Councillor Pelosa for working on the language for the resolution. Happy to support it.
Any further comments or questions? Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to clarify with this motion, I think it's the last clause of the motion. Currently, we contract a third-party operator for the 2 water boards that supply London with water. It's being run by the Ontario Clean Water Agency, Aqua. Would this be in danger of not being renewed with the contract with an agency such as this with the current wording? I just wanted to confirm that.
Councillor Van Meerbergen, through to staff, perhaps Ms. Scherer, or not sure who's best.
Through the presiding officer. So we have confirmed that, and that is a contracted service, which is completely reasonable given the Blue Communities initiative. So that is not something that would be that we would look at changing in the future, and the resolution does not create a problem with proceeding with contracts like that in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay. We have it moved and seconded. If there's no further debate, we can put that to a vote. Oh, Councillor Van Holst pops up. Please proceed.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Presiding Officer. My question through you to our staff, perhaps the city engineer, there's looks like it's going to be a change in the organization and perhaps the legal status of our water boards. And I'm wondering if that will have felt an impact because of this particular motion. So perhaps Ms. Shear could.
I see Ms. Shear pop up. Please proceed.
Easier than raising our hands, I think, sometimes. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. So the decision regarding the legal status of the water boards, which actually is not a decision solely of the City of London, but of all of the member municipalities and their respective councils, does not affect London's choice to become a blue community or not become a blue community. We are not able to bind the fellow communities that are participants in those water boards. There's no foregone conclusion as to what will come out of the review that the water authorities are doing. London is a participant. I've got a couple of hats to wear here, but we don't believe there's anything contradictory or challenging with that review or with London's decision to become a blue community.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. Councillor Van Holst, anything further?
Okay, thank you. That was reassuring. I'm maybe make a couple comments just on this. First, I'm a big fan of Ms. Brown. Thanks for attending. There was a situation happened in Bolivia where the government gave the rights for all water to a corporation, and it was illegal for the residents of those communities even to put pots out and collect rainwater. It was a terrible human rights violation. So in this case, I don't know that I'm not sure I agree that it's a fundamental right for people to have water pumped directly to their home at the cost of other ratepayers. However, I think that if water was, I believe that drinking water is definitely a right, and if we didn't go down this direction, then it would certainly be reasonable for us to deliver jugs of water to anyone in this situation. But I'm going to leave this up to the committee. Certainly, the third motion that we keep this in public ownership, I think is very important. We don't want to get into the kinds of situations that happened in Bolivia or those other countries. So that's very important. With regard to bottled water, I think I do see a value in bottles of water in terms of choice, as to people might want to avoid some of the treatment chemicals that we're putting in our water. But so for me, that's still a priority. I was actually going to hope to address some of that earlier this year. However, there was a lockdown, and so those are my comments on there. And I want to congratulate the city for coming so close to being a blue community, despite not having gone in this direction previously.
Thank you, Councillor Van Holst. I'll look for any other comments. Seeing none, I'll turn it to the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Thank you very much. And Madam Chair, the chair is yours again.
Thank you. Excellent job, Mr. Presiding Officer. Moving on, item 3.2, new sidewalks in 2021 infrastructure reconstruction projects. We have already set a future meeting for delegates to appear before us on March 15th. Before us is a list of communications and a few other requests for delegation status. The clerk does have wording provided in advance of a motion to receive the written communications and approve the delegation requests. If I could just ask them to read that wording, and then we can look for a mover and a seconder in any discussion on the topic.
That the following actions be taken with respect to the new sidewalks in 2021 infrastructure reconstruction projects. Part A, the request for delegation by the following individuals with respect to this matter be approved for the Special Civic Works Committee meeting to be held on March 15th, 2021. Stephen J. McCall, A. Harris Schultz, M. Mannering, and S. Connolly. And Part B, the communications as appended to the agenda and the added agenda with respect to this matter be received.
Okay, so looking to committee for a mover and a seconder of the motion that was just read out, moved by Councillor Van Meerbergen, seconded by Councillor Helmer. Also for committee's knowledge, those who those who are granting delegation status to, I've checked with the clerk and they will do their best of abilities in advance of the 15th of grouping residents from the same area together as they become forward to us to being presented to help make the delegates as coherent as possible as we move through what will be a longer meeting. So looking to see if there's any other questions or comments from committee about this before we go to vote. Seeing no hands, eScribe will be opening momentarily.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Perfect. Thank you. For direction, I am not aware of any deferred matters list. The mayor has declared a conflict on this one. Okay, so looking for a mover and a seconder, moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Cassidy. Any discussion on the deferred matters list? Seeing none, eScribe will be opening.
Councillor Helmer? Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0 with 1 abstain.
Moves us on to adjournment. For a mover, Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Councillor Van Meerbergen. And that vote will be opening. Oh, perfect, a hand vote. You guys basically already had it. Just reconfirming that. Unanimous decision. I wish you all a wonderful day, what's left of it, and I will see you again for our special meeting. Have a great week.
Thank you, Chair.